It all began when Charietta, the only and beloved daughter of the Tiardrop ducal family, disappeared. The Duke searched everywhere for his daughter, but the search was unsuccessful, and the Duchess, unable to bear the pain, soon fell gravely ill. But a few years later, the Duke finally found his beloved daughter. Unfortunately, Charietta remembers nothing of what happened to her after her disappearance. The father did everything possible for his daughter, and she tried and studied as much as she could to please her father. Until for some time, it seemed that their happiness would last forever. Until at one point, another Charietta appeared, whom they considered an impostor. Chariot was loved by everyone. But in fact, the beloved Duke's daughter was only her replacement. She was falsely accused and imprisoned. Everyone turned their backs on the impostor. One day, Charietta number 1 approached the girl, the one who was before. She said that tomorrow she would be executed because her father said so. She even said that the girl's head would be cut off. But since there were too many eyes around, Charietta decided to poison the impostor. She had prepared a special poison that would not allow her to die peacefully. And finally, the girl would become the only Charietta. As successor to the family, she will receive an inheritance. She will shine brightly, and the impostor will fade prematurely. The girl will be remembered as an impostor who posed as the Duke's daughter. Charietta slapped the impostor and said it felt even better. When she sits like this in a chain, like a half-breed, it seems to her that finally everything has fallen into place. Usually the impostor would kick and curse Charietta, but now she doesn't do that. But you shouldn't hate the real Charietta so much, because none of this belonged to the impostor from the beginning. She should be eternally grateful for having had the opportunity to live in luxury. Finally, Charietta decided to talk about the fact that she was also not the Duke's real daughter. The girl asked if the impostor would now expect something, because her rival turned out to be an impostor. Charietta said this because she would not leave the impostor the slightest chance of survival. It turns out to be funny because she knows the truth, but still won't be able to tell anyone. Because she will die soon. The next minute, Charietta injected poison into the impostor, and she screamed loudly in pain. Her heart seemed to break, and the girl herself didn't understand why she was suffering so much. At that moment, she suddenly woke up and got out of bed with a very frightened face. The girl was in a large, bright room and didn't understand what had just happened. Immediately, Bella's maid ran to her and asked if she was okay. The maid offered to call the doctor, but the girl remembered her dream in which Bella betrayed her. Through these thoughts, the current Charietta asked how old she was at that time. Bella replied that she would turn 20 tomorrow, but for now she was only 19. Little by little, the girl realized that it had all been a dream, as if she had seen the future. But now time had returned. Charietta pulled up her knees and sat down with an astonished face and a blank stare. She realized that tomorrow, on her 20th birthday, another Charietta would appear. Maid Bella still didn't understand the reason for the Duke's daughter's state and asked if she had a nightmare. The assumption that it was a nightmare turned out to be the truest, and Charietta ordered preparations for her birthday. But the girl still doubted that it was just a dream, but now she was about to make a social debut. Charietta, in disguise, went out and her father told her she looked especially beautiful today. She felt as if only one day had passed since she found her daughter. The father always took such meticulous care of his daughter that she did everything possible to be that very Charietta for him. Posing as the Duke's daughter for the sake of her fortune, she became mired in deceit and lies. The girl had become a substitute who at some point might prove useless to anyone. These thoughts consumed Charietta, and for moments she forgot she was at a celebration. She tried to push these thoughts away, consoling herself that her father would never abandon her, because he was always generous and kind to his fake daughter. A servant with a monocle loudly announced that the Duke of Tiardrop's daughter had arrived at the mansion. During his speech, Charietta suddenly remembered a dream in which the exact same moment occurred. Feliot abruptly approached his father and whispered something incomprehensible in his ear. After these words, the father apologized and told his daughter that he needed to leave her for a while. Charietta immediately realized that her dream was coming true. And that, most likely, they had found an imposter calling herself Charietta. The young woman, in tears, convinced her father to stay with her, because today was her birthday. She didn't stop, and finally said she would try to return to the beginning of the celebration. However, the father did not return, and the celebration passed, accompanied by the condemnation of the head of the family, who did not attend his daughter's festivities. That night, Charietta sat in the library and realized that a complete nightmare had occurred that day. Never before had the Duke's daughter been betrayed like this, and she knew that if everything remained as it was, she would die in agony. Sincerely, she did not want this nightmare to repeat itself in reality. At the end of her reasoning, she firmly decided that she would start a new life to avoid it. For this, it was necessary to leave here as soon as possible, but there is no guarantee that this will change anything. After all, the second Charietta would pursue her, even when she left these places. The girl had no choice but to ally herself with some noble family that would sponsor her. For some time, 5 noble families united their lands and created a state. However, when the Central Duchy of Persia gained power, the 4 border families gradually faded into the shadows. And since then, Persia has produced emperors, but the struggle for power continues. The Duchy of Orsent has fertile lands and a temperate climate, as well as a ruling clan second only to the emperor. Considering its reputation and status, it seemed the best option for Charietta. However, her choice fell on the Duchy of Manzalt, famous for its severe frosts. Of the 4 clans, this was the weakest, the land of brave warriors who defied the cold climate. Nothing grows in the frozen soil. And after they started accepting foreigners, their ancestry was called into question. Moreover, the current head had a disgusting reputation. They say he is a real savage and a bloodthirsty murderer. The current Charietta knew her future and therefore had the advantage. She knew that the head of the duchy would one day become the strongest emperor. That such a famous ruler was at the head of an empire was a true miracle. The Duke will achieve exactly this, and the Tiardrop family will not keep the girl. According to her plan, Manzalt will have the strength to resist the other Charietta. Charietta closed her diary and suddenly realized that there was another rather big problem. The girls selected as brides in the capital are representatives of noble families, and an impostor is unlikely to be needed there. The Duke's daughter thought about how to gain the support of the future emperor. Some interesting papers caught her attention, and she wondered how long the Duke of Manzalt would stay in the capital. Because during this time, she needed to prepare especially well. The Duke, heading towards the building, said he had never loved this city. He entered a large mansion and ordered his guards to follow him. The next day, the girl went to the Tiardrop mansion to talk to her father. She was in a serious mood because she knew the outcome of the events. When she entered, her father was standing by the window, thoughtfully looking into the distance. Seeing her, he sat down in a chair and said they needed to have a serious conversation. It seemed the man was afraid to start a conversation, but his daughter already knew everything. But she pretended to be calm. She didn't understand why it was so difficult to tell the truth. Finally, the father gathered his thoughts and announced that the girl currently in the room was not his daughter. He immediately began to tell how, after the disappearance of his relative, his wife fell ill. And he decided to adopt a girl who looked like her. He explained that this girl turned out to be Charietta, who was sitting opposite him. Then, she asked him why he had been deceiving her all this time, and he replied that there was no malicious intent in it. But Charietta still didn't understand why he decided to tell her this right now. The answer was based on the discovery of the real daughter, Charietta blank Tiardrop. The girl asked what her father wanted from her now, after such a declaration. The man replied that he wanted to return the name to Charietta that rightfully belongs to her. He also added that he only needed this, and that the current Charietta would remain his daughter. And this will not affect her life in any way. Everything was exactly like in that dream. And the girl asked what would happen if she refused this. After all, he gave her this name in childhood and raised her under the same name all the time. If her father thought about the consequences, then the name should have been the last thing they talked about. He began to say that he was very sorry and that his daughter should still understand and accept it. He argued that the girl had to grow up in high society and be happy. In response to this, Charietta began to talk about the fact that she was only his replacement. Mentally, she understood that her father didn't think about her at all, so she decided to act according to the plan. First, she ordered not to call her Charietta anymore, because that name does not belong to her. Then she transferred all her past affairs to the current Charietta, including her frustrated social debut. Since all the guests were too busy talking about her, they didn't have time to look at the birthday girl's face. In return, the girl demanded that the lands of Murata be handed over to her. The father wanted to insert a word, but his daughter interrupted him and said that she already knew what kind of lands those were. They are famous for their beautiful views, but the girl didn't need land, she needed treasures. When the blonde had already left the door, the father promised to arrange everything as quickly as possible. A few days later, in the same mansion, there was another meeting between father and daughter. He handed her the papers about the land that had been discussed a few days ago. The girl accepted these papers and saw that now her name would be Symphony. She thanked her now deceased father, and he tried to apologize. He also asked when his daughter was going to these lands, and she replied that this afternoon. During their conversation, the real Charietta entered the office and apologized because she thought her father was alone. The symphonic hoped to have time to leave and not run into Charietta, because that's when everything started the same way. She intentionally stated that since all the work was finished, it was time to leave. Charietta asked if the blonde was leaving, and she replied affirmatively. They asked her to stay a little longer, but the girl knew it was pointless. Finally, she completed everything that kept her in this incomprehensible place. There was nothing left to fear, and the symphonic was on the verge of the abyss. Now she embarks on a long journey to meet the Duke of Manzalt. A few days later, the symphonic arrived in the capital, where she received condemnation from the local population. She never imagined that they would talk about her so openly. But this only benefits her, because that way she could find a residence faster. At the moment of her thoughts, a vagrant crossed her path and asked what she needed here. The girl came to ask for an audience with His Excellency, the Grand Duke. The man asked if she had an agreement with His Excellency, and Symphony replied negatively. Objectively. She also added that the conversation is not for curious ears and that she needs a personal meeting. Then, the guard explained that they could not let anyone in except guests. In that case, the girl will be able to tell you where to find her and determine the meeting place. Symphony was angry because the guard's powers were only to inform His Highness about the guest. Mentally, she understood that the Duke would not stay in the capital for long. And during this time, she needed to have time to meet him. Otherwise, the girl will only have to follow him to his homeland, that is, to the north. After these thoughts, she said she had very little time and asked if there was any other way. The guard found a way out and said that she would have to defeat an armed warrior. As expected from Northerners, to get what you want, you must first fight. Symphony asked if they would take her to the Duke if she won the duel, and the guard replied affirmatively. And he also swore on his life. The impostor accepted this fight and agreed to fight right now. The man informed her that if she lost, the fight would be considered an act of hostility. In other words, if the symphonic wins, she will have no problems. In that case, the guard promised to take care of all the problems and advised her to take out her weapon. Her rival replied that she didn't need a weapon, and he attacked her with his spear with all his might. He also added that arrogance has never brought anyone any good. After the first blow, the girl realized that if she hit the target even once, no life would be enough. The guardian suggested she surrender now, but Symphony refused, so he flew towards her with even greater force. After several strong blows and threats, he again offered to surrender, but received no response. This is because Symphony used her characteristic ability, which she received since birth. The guard hanging upside down was angry and didn't understand what had just happened, and why he hung so quickly. The girl slowly approached and asked if their fight was over. The blue-haired boy opened his mouth in astonishment and asked if this mysterious girl was a mage. Symphony apologized for such an act and reminded him that she really needed to meet His Excellency. The now freed guard knelt before her and said that winners do not apologize to losers. In that case, a meeting with His Excellency will be arranged as soon as possible. In the reception room were Jack and Fessarn, as well as Symphony in a hooded cloak. The blonde was very curious to know what the strong man who could defeat Fessarn himself looked like. Jack's companion advised her to be more careful with her expressions, especially towards His Excellency's guests. The boys joked among themselves, and the girl in the cloak drank tea at the same time. Suddenly, the Duke himself entered through the door, and the knights immediately fell silent and bowed to him. The man asked if this was the strong man who won the fight with Fessarn, and Symphony couldn't say anything. She sat with her head bowed and did not answer the question of whether she was a mage. After a few seconds, she finally said something, and Jack, hearing a woman's voice, was surprised because Fessarn was defeated by a woman. Due to such exclamations, the Duke sent the guards outside the door and ordered them to wait there. After they left, the man sat in a chair and asked for what purpose the woman came to him. It was difficult for her to speak, so the Duke said that if she remained silent, he would leave. If you believe the rumors, she was indescribably ugly, but it has nothing to do with reality. She approached and announced that she had a business proposal that would help in the implementation of his plans. Upon hearing the word plans, the Duke looked at her threateningly and asked if this would really help his plans. The girl affirmed that if he accepted the deal, his plans would come true in 3 years. Symphony added that she knew his plans, which is why she came to him with the merchandise. She told him about her life. No one from the outside should know His Excellency's plans, as this is a closely guarded secret. The Duke asked if there was a good reason for this, and the girl replied that the reason was that she wanted to survive. She lowered her gaze and began to talk about Chariot Blanc Tiardrop, the name she once used. Of course, the Duke knew this name, but he didn't understand at all what this woman in the cloak was talking about. Mona Salt asked how this incident related to her visit to his district. The thing is, the Duke's daughter had not yet been found, and Mona Salt asked if she was going to be a daughter in her place. The girl replied negatively. Symphony explained that the Duke took her in to comfort his gravely ill wife. She was a substitute for his daughter. The man asked if it wasn't happiness to be the Duke's daughter, even if not real, because he heard that her father adored her. In response to this, the blonde said that not long ago they found his real daughter. Of course, she knew that the girl was also an imposter, but she decided not to talk about it for now. Then she asked if his plan was to get rid of this Duke's daughter, and Sinfonia replied that she simply wanted to find her place in life. After all, being a replacement all the time, she never lived her own life. The girl sincerely did not want things to continue as they were, and the Duke said that this was quite an interesting story, and immediately added that he was not involved in charity work and would not buy something so useless for him. Of course, the blonde was not asking for sympathy, she just wants a fair price for what she sells. Manzalt noted that this girl was very persistent and asked what she could give him. The symphonic replied that the Duke would become emperor and receive golden laurels. These words surprised the man, and he asked if she understood how dangerous things she was saying. After these words, the girl looked him boldly in the face and reminded him that he really wanted this. Then he ordered it to be brought to him because he wanted to see everything with his own eyes. For now this was impossible, because what the symphonic gives him is his future. Faced with such statements, Mona Salt became angry and looked angrily at the blonde, asking if she was laughing at him. In response, the symphonic began to talk about the coming plague, a contagious disease that was not easy to cure. She also added that she knows the means. For this, she needs a good hospital and trained doctors. The evil Duke asked why he should believe her words about the epidemic. And the Emperor. The blonde had previously assumed that Manzalt would not believe her immediately, so she prepared arguments. According to her, this should save the duchy from an inevitable and terrible tragedy. Many lives will be saved, and His Excellency's army will also be safe. But the disaster will not end with just a plague epidemic. It will be followed by an invasion of locust hordes that will cause terrible famine. Suddenly, the Duke interrupted her story and announced that he no longer wanted to hear such nonsense. That is, if Manzalt refuses, everything he owns will remain as it is now. Symphony can see the future. That's why she knows why His Excellency will become emperor. The Duke looked down at the girl's eyes from above and asked if she still insisted on the ability to see this nonsense from the future. The blonde replied affirmatively and added that if a man listens to her, he can change everything. In the future revealed to her, His Excellency would become emperor. But achieving his goals would not be enough to win. This is because he will constantly be afraid of being overthrown from the throne. Therefore, the symphonic is going to lead Mona Salta to an unconditional victory. Mona Salt didn't quite understand in what sense she was speaking, so he asked again. The girl explained that all her words and plans were in the most literal sense. Following the will of the empire, the Northern Duchy was the first to accept foreigners. So they started calling themselves foreigners. The policy of accepting different peoples aims to reduce the power of the four lands. And since their bloodline contains the power they inherited from their predecessors, many rejected such changes. But only one duchy of Manzalt remained that accepted these changes, because at that time, Manzalt was on the verge of decline. And without the support of the imperial family, it would not have been able to survive. At the same time, the former duke married an unknown foreigner, and from then on, blood mixing began in the northern lands. So, even if the duke receives golden laurels, prejudices will not disappear. But he didn't care much about other people's opinions. The girl continued to say that even if he didn't care, the very fact that Manzalt was the duke of the northern lands would become his weakness in the eyes of his rivals. The imperial land itself fears the power of the lineage, but the duke no longer has that power. In Manzalta, which barely survived with the support of the imperial family, not a single pure-blooded representative of the family remained. Next, Sinfonia asked the duke if he knew what people called him, and without waiting for an answer, she said that his name was half-breed. Faced with such words, Manzalt became enraged and putting a sharp sword to the blonde's neck. He asked if her life was worth it. But the girl was not afraid at all, and asked him if he really thought she would lie to him. The young woman's blood flowed down the sword, and she continued to talk about how the foundation of the empire dates back to the distant past. And besides Manzalt, none of the clans, and even the imperial clan, had this ancient power left. Even if they claim their blood is pure, this is physically impossible. Once upon a time, to maintain purity, marriages were strictly conducted within the same family. Children born from inbred marriages had this power, but these times did not last long. This is because closely related marriages resulted in many hereditary diseases. And children were born who could not inherit the throne. After this incident, marriages within the same family were prohibited, becoming a dark page in the history of the empire. Therefore, all people living today are half-breeds, but only one family was subjected to contempt for this. Since Manzaltus is the weakest of the entire lineage, he is not spoken of well. When people talk about the northern lands, they think that savages who eat raw monster meat live there. Hearing such rumors, the duke objected because they had never caught monsters, let alone eat their raw meat. By removing the sword from his neck, thus also injuring his hand, Symphony pointed out the inconsistency of things. Because the inhabitants of Mozart are not afraid, for the empire they are just subjects. That's why they don't fear the duke himself, but only see him as an evil dog. Even when he ascends the throne, nothing will change. Many will not be happy with the fact that they are ruled by an evil dog. Mona's denied it, saying that all those who oppose will be destroyed, but it will still be impossible to keep people afraid forever. His approach should be to give credit to the other families, because it is unknown what will happen to the empires when the weakest of the families takes power. Therefore, the symphonic wants to eradicate contempt and prejudice. She will help the duke make everyone recognize him as a ruler. Finally, removing the sword from the girl's neck, Manzalt asked her what she wanted in return. Sinfonia replied that when she helped him ascend the throne, he should make her his empress. Of course, if during this time he finds someone he likes, he can freely make the blonde a queen. The blonde doesn't care who the duke loves. She didn't need ducal love at all, she only needed the imperial crown. The man evaluated the proposal for some time, and soon revealed that it was quite a bold statement. Faced with this, the girl asked if she could count on the fulfillment of his conditions. It was necessary to fulfill her conditions only because she was very valuable to the duke. No matter how hard Symphony tried, she couldn't remember anything about what happened before her life in the Tiardrop family. She didn't know who her parents were. If she was from a noble family, she knew nothing other than her existence. Therefore, to protect herself, the girl must receive the imperial crown. The duke pointed out that Symphony does not know fear, despite the fact that she was thrown in the trash like a useless doll. He also asked her if she was really sure that the man would accept her. The blonde reminded him that 4 great families would soon fall before him, and it would be easier for him if the girl helped him. Manzalt circled Symphony again and said that he was tempted to say such things. But that deep down he was afraid. He also asked why the girl was so eager to ascend the imperial throne, and if she wanted revenge. Symphony only wanted to protect herself because the real duke's daughter hates her. To survive, the blonde needs to be stronger than her, because the more you have, the more opportunities open up. And most importantly, the more effort you put in, the better position you can take. After these words, the duke took the crown and noticed that the girl was arrogant. Because diamonds are expensive, because everyone knows how valuable they are. Next, he asked if this blonde considered herself a real diamond. But she avoided the question and said that the price of the merchandise is determined by the merchant himself. That is, the Duke of Manzalt. However, do not forget that it is very profitable to buy when they are sold very cheaply. Suddenly, the man abruptly headed for the exit and announced that he would call the doctor. The wound on the neck was superficial, but the arm would need to be sutured, and Symphony realized that a scar would probably remain on her arm. But that was no longer so important. This is because the girl was no longer the duke's daughter, and Manzalt had nothing to worry about. When the doctor stitched the blonde's hand, the duke was surprised because Symphony did not make any sound. But she replied that it was not that painful for her. After a few minutes, the wounds healed, and the doctor asked if he could leave. After the doctor left the payment, the duke informed Symphony that he would not buy the damaged goods. For her, this was only an advantage, because he was willing to buy her products anyway. The duke replied that he was tormented by doubts because anything could be said. The girl asked if the duke wanted confirmation of her words, and the man replied affirmatively. Then he will need time to convince himself that the symphonic is right. After all, she understood Manzalt's doubts and did not want the duke to hate her for it. The man looked threateningly and said that arrogance is a very good thing, and time will tell if the blonde is deceiving him. Or not. The duke proposed a small test, which consisted of the symphonic predicting the future, and he would see if it came true or not. He gave her a piece of paper so she could write down all the possible scenarios she knew. But the blonde stated that this test was impossible because she still did not fully trust Manzalt. For this reason, Symphony cannot tell the duke everything so easily. These words angered the man, and he asked if the girl wanted her insolent mouth to be forcibly shut. In response, Symphony ran her hand over the paper and advised him to have a little more patience. She stated that she could only tell him one small thing. Tomorrow, at dawn, Manzalt will be urgently summoned to the imperial capital. This concerns not only him, but also the dukes of the 4 lands. Manzalt replied that he could easily predict such things himself. Then the blonde added that the heads of great noble families would also be there, and that the sun of the imperial days would set. The duke was shocked by this news. It is clearly evident from his facial expression. According to Symphony, the next ruler should be the second prince. And she gave the right to judge whether the girl told the truth or lied to the Duke of Manzalt himself. The next day turned out to be very warm and sunny, unlike the previous one. Midday, the duke furiously entered the chamber, where Sinfonia was calmly drinking tea. Without distracting from her work, she said it was time to hear the answer. He wanted to hear a clear answer. Either he would kill her, or he would keep her by his side. The man stood right above her and looked threateningly into the girl's eyes, asking how she knew everything. Symphony reminded him that she had already talked about her ability to see the future. But this angered the Duke even more. While under Mona Salta's strong control, the blonde pointed out that the Duke himself was convinced of her ability. But he replied that he never believed, and now does not believe in any prophecy. Then the girl averted her gaze and asked if this bothered Manzalt a lot. And she reminded him that he doesn't have to believe her and can simply use her for his own purposes. And the symphonic, in turn, will secretly take advantage of Manzalt's personality. She likes very much what the Duke lacks, because those who have known hunger are greedy. And they are willing to do anything. The man said that she couldn't even imagine the hunger he had. The girl gave no answer, and then Manzalt leaned towards her face and asked the blonde's name. Then Symphony placed her hand on the Duke's cheek and pronounced her name. That same day, the girl went to the room to change clothes, and a few minutes later a maid entered the same room, who introduced herself as Brownie. For some unknown reason, she asked to be called by her first name, Mercy. Mercy brought a dress that was supposed to fit Symphony, but it might be a little big on her. The girl said that this was not a problem, because it is better to wear a large dress than a blood-stained suit. Then the maid asked if she could help the blonde change clothes. Symphony thanked her for her concern, but refused, because she knows how to change clothes herself. Seeing how quickly the girl unbuttoned, Mercy stated that the blonde was much more agile than she expected. She said this because she heard how some ladies in the capital didn't know how to dress without external help. The maid had already started changing the subject, and Symphony mentally noted that Mercy wasn't even trying to hide her displeasure. Mercy said something about her clumsiness, and the blonde told her that if something doesn't work, you have to try until you succeed. That's why she wanted to help Mercy, because she couldn't allow her clumsiness to undermine His Excellency's honor. Hearing the words about His Excellency, the maid asked what that had to do with it. Then, Sinfonia asked if a master has dignity if he doesn't know how to govern his subjects properly. She asked if Mona Salt had ordered her to mock her guest, or if Mercy herself made this bad decision regarding the symphonic. Since the maid didn't want to answer, the blonde said that it wasn't entirely necessary. She also added that it seemed she would have to ask His Excellency about it. The maid grabbed the girl's hand, trying to stop her, but she turned around and said that Mercy was insolent towards her master's guests. How can she behave like that if she herself is afraid of His Excellency? She doesn't like the symphonic because she is from the capital, or maybe there is some other reason. The blonde doesn't know. And she asked if it was possible to at least not show it while the guest was here. Before expressing her displeasure, the maid must think about who gives her orders. Mentally, Symphony expected such hostility, and therefore declared that she did not need Mercy's help. It was all because the inhabitants of Manzalt do not like foreigners, especially those who came from the capital. The blonde abruptly headed for the exit and announced that she would inform His Excellency about Mercy's behavior. A guard was waiting for her near the door and asked if the girl was ready. And she replied affirmatively. Upon leaving, she understood that this attitude towards her was the beginning of her adventures. They approached another door, and the guard said that His Excellency was waiting for her. Sinfonia entered the chamber and immediately apologized for making the Duke wait. The Duke showed patience, but it seemed to him that it was useless or that his eyes were deceiving him. The blonde explained that the girl whom Mona Salt ordered to take care of her had insulted her. So Sinfonia refused the maid's help. Then the man asked if she had only come to complain. Upon hearing a positive answer, he asked how she was going to be a duchess if she couldn't even put one person in his place. The girl replied that until she became duchess, she could only endure it. And if she becomes one, she will face it completely differently, that is, in her own way. After several minutes of silence, Mona Salt handed Sinfonica the paper that was her marriage contract. Following the girl's plan, All that remained was to sign it and send it to the temple, where the wedding ceremony would take place. That day, the couple will be officially declared happy husband and wife. After studying the contract more closely, Symphony noticed the second clause written in small letters. The Duke explained that to save the marriage it would be necessary to fulfill certain conditions. That is an agreement. His future wife asked why there were only 5, because she thought there would be many more. And if the Duke listens to her request, then she will have no questions about these conditions. This request was solely to respect all the rights and obligations of the spouse. After reading it, the man asked why it was so simple and direct, but the girl did not give him a clear answer. Her wish was for her to have only ideal living conditions. Manzalt agreed and said he hoped they could fulfill each other's wishes. Symphony couldn't believe they were getting married already. Everything happened too fast. The Duke also added that the wedding would take place when they returned to Manzalt, and that they would dispense with pompous ceremonies. The blonde replied that she understood, and the Duke was surprised, as he took this news much more calmly than expected. Looking at the man with a cold gaze, she said that there was no point in organizing anything grand. A wedding is a good reason for celebration, but in Manzalta everything is a little different. So you shouldn't give it special importance. This is because the strongest powers look down on Manzalt, so they are despised in the northern lands. Therefore, when the symphonic acts as a bride, the Manzaltanos are unlikely to be happy with the capital bride. But it always seemed to the Duke that most women dream of a magnificent wedding. And beautiful. In response to this, the girl sweetly said that if everyone dreamed of this, everyone would live an exemplary family life. If that were Symphony's goal, she wouldn't have signed the contract, because it's not so much about marriage as it is about a business alliance. This is not at all a pure union of souls. It is an enterprise that seeks to obtain the greatest profit at any cost. On the day of departure to the north, a beautiful red carriage stood right in front of the Duke's chamber. The Duchess of Manzalt was already boarding the carriage, and the Duke asked her if she regretted this event. She replied negatively, and the man ordered her to be sent north. As far as he knew, yesterday there was a party at the Tiardrop mansion, where the heiress was solemnly presented. Symphony said that she also heard some news about this matter. Then the Duke asked what his wife had to say about this. The girl looked mysteriously out the window and replied that she had no special thoughts about this situation. It became known that for the past few years, all the Duke's affairs were handled by his daughter. The Duke asked if this didn't offend her, because instead of the symphonic, all eyes were now directed at her. The girl replied that this did not bother her at all, because previously she had lived under the patronage of the ducal family, and she perceived it as payment for those times. After hearing her answer, Mona Salt noted that his wife was very intelligent. She shrugged and continued talking about how they would have gotten rid of her otherwise. It seemed to Mona Salt that his wife did not look at all like a person they could get rid of. These words slightly frightened the blonde, and she decided to ask him what he already knew about her. The man stroked his chin and said that the suddenly emerging heiress could not cope with the work that the previous person in her place had done years ago. Consequently, all previous achievements belonged to the one who previously took her place. Symphony replied that the real heiress was also capable of many things. And she asked if the Duke was trying to test her. But he was only trying to determine her worth, and once again, make sure that he really bought the diamond. The Duchess of Manzalt asked him if he was satisfied with the result, and the answer to this question was affirmative. During a long silence, the blonde suddenly looked cheerfully into the distance. Manzalt noticed and asked her if she was happy with everything now. Because of this, she looked away and said that she simply did not expect such words from him. Since they now have a common cause, the girl should not be too cautious. And there was only one creature that worried the Duke. It was the symphonic. There were several reasons, for example, the strength with which the blonde defeated his guard Fessarn. Hearing such statements, the girl was shocked, as she did not know that there was anything so alarming about her. The Duke pointed out that it is better to hide curiosity until you get what you want. Then Sinfonia replied to him in the same way, which alerted the man. She asked him to give her what she wanted, and only then could they talk about it. The blonde wanted her legal husband to change his attitude towards her. Since she is now his wife and Duchess of Manzalt, she must be treated as such. Manzalt realized that the girl wanted to be treated as a legal wife. And this made him frown. Since husband and wife must respect each other, a man should not allow himself to speak rudely to a woman. Because unless the Duke changes his attitude towards the symphonic, people will not take her seriously. She had to do this because Symphony is his wife and Manzalt is her legal husband. Then the man asked what would happen if he could not satisfy her request. If this happens, Symphony will simply stop showing him respect, and if the Duke respects her, the girl will reciprocate. The girl also added that otherwise she is not obliged to do so. After such a request, the man brought his hand to his head, thus removing the hair from his forehead. And he thought mentally how strange this woman is. Symphony, in turn, also mentally noted that she looked much better when her hair didn't cover her forehead. She immediately interrupted the thread of such thoughts with a question about why he was thinking about such nonsense. After a few minutes of silence, the Duke addressed her, calling her my lady, and asking if she wanted to be called that way. But the girl did not answer, she only laughed when she heard such a call. Manzalt did not understand the reason for her laughter, and Sinfonia explained that it suited her very well. It was not about the tone, but about respect for the lady, because that is a characteristic modal of a gentleman. Because of this unpleasant conversation, the Duke turned to look out the window. And his wife added that she was much better than before. And this made the man narrow his eyes. She continued to say that at first it would seem unnatural to him, but over time, he wouldn't even notice how he would get used to it. The Duchess finished her speech with a beautiful look and a declaration that she believed in the Duke. After some time, the carriage stopped, and the driver said that the wheel was broken, and that it would take some time to replace it. Because of this, the couple went for a walk in the forest, and Manzalt, without missing the opportunity, asked how the girl managed to defeat Fetsarn. He also recalled their recent conversation and asked again, but more politely. Symphony began her story by saying that she regretted disappointing her husband. Her power has nothing to do with magic, and besides, he himself knows that the Tiardrop family has a long history of its own. The family coat of arms depicts fairy wings, and there were many legends about the fairies themselves. The power of the symphonic is precisely a direct inheritance from the fairies represented on the family coat of arms. But to tell the truth, not even the true members of the Tiardrop family possess it. They think it's a fairy tale for children. However, this is much more than just legends. It is a force that strengthens the family's position. Manzalt found all this even stranger and asked how the girl could master this power. In the end, it turned out that she reread all the old books kept in the mansion. She dreamed of possessing magical powers. She also hoped that if she could revive the ancient magical power, her father would be proud of her. But when she succeeded, it brought her no joy because, instead of praise, she received a severe reprimand. Now the girl understood that for her father, this seemed like stealing from a family tree. The Duke did not agree that acquiring magical powers could be explained by reading a couple of books. Then Symphony asked if Manzalt knew about the Tiardrop family necklace, called Fairy Tears. He replied positively and asked how her power and this necklace were related. Symphony responded by using an invocation spell on Fairy Tears. With the help of the necklace, it was possible to summon a fairy, but no one had ever experienced the spell in action before. The man did not understand if this fairy was still with her and where she was now. This fairy was with her before, but because the girl did something stupid, she is not around now. By making a decision, she lost her old friend, but at the same time, she managed to avoid tragedy. The blonde had a rough idea of what her husband was thinking now and said that fairies were completely useless in battle. The Duke remembered that she defeated Fetsarn, but if the battle had continued, the girl would have been defeated. She assumed that the reason for his defeat was that he did not intend to kill her in the first place. So she let her guard down. Hearing this suggestion, Manzalt called his guard a pathetic fool, and they continued their journey through the forest. Suddenly, Symphony took the Duke's hands and extended them in his direction. He did not expect such actions, so he asked what she was doing now. She simply felt that the man did not believe her, so she wanted him to see with his own eyes. But not even this explanation made Manzalt feel better. On the contrary, he was a little scared. Before he had time to think, thick green stems tied his wrists and lifted him up. It suddenly occurred to him that such an ability could be useful for growing vegetables. In response to this, the girl said that if you try, you can make flowers bloom. These flowers grow quickly, but they also fade quickly. That was all the magic. The man felt that elven magic was too grand a name for something so childish. Symphony added that most elves are no different from naughty children. Seeing his expression, the girl asked if he was disappointed, and the Duke replied that he was quite surprised. This was because he did not expect his wife to reveal her secret so directly at all. She replied that it would not be good to boast and encourage his excellency. The Duke asked if the essence of transactions was not to sell even an ordinary stone, advertising it with the help of oratory. But then Symphony replied that this would be considered fraud and that she was not a scammer, but a like-minded person. To build trust, there is no need to sell anything, they just need to learn more from each other. Step by step. Still trying to break free, Manzalt declared that Symphony had already given him high hopes, and asked if the girl was worried that her partner might be dissatisfied. The girl, looking up, said there was no point in trusting someone you simply don't trust. Having looked up all the way, Symphony suddenly realized that they were too close to each other. Manzalt pointed out that most people look away, but when their gazes meet, something happens. The blonde assumed that those looks hid something. And the Duke added that, in his opinion, she looked more like a person who hides something. Naturally, she also had secrets, because all people have one. Or two secrets. The girl also added that if the Duke trusts her, she will never betray him. In her case, this was true because she did not want to be like those who had betrayed her before. Suddenly, the man asked what would happen if he betrayed Symphony. And the girl, without thinking for a moment, replied that his life would end. For such a quick and simple answer, Symphony seemed to the Duke not the person who dared to address him. It was just that the blonde was fully aware that this was her last chance in life. Their emotional conversation was interrupted by a breathless rider who said he had barely found them. He notified them that he could not replace the wheel, and therefore it would be impossible to go further in the carriage. So Symphony said she would have to put her things on the horse and walk. Hearing such a statement, Manzalt warned that this path might be very hard for the blonde. During the journey, the Duke said that horses could not withstand such frost and, therefore, they would have to travel another way. The man thought his wife's voice was trembling, so he asked if she was cold. Rubbing her shoulders, she replied that as long as the cold was bearable, she could go on. Moreover, she added that she was simply not used to the frost and northern winds. Realizing that the girl was freezing, Manzalt took off his coat and said they hadn't even crossed the border yet. The news that it would get even colder horrified the blonde even more. The Duke handed Symphony a coat and told her to put it on, and she asked if her husband was cold. Taking the clothes in her hands, the wife realized that the coat would drag on the floor, and it could get frayed. The husband replied that there was nothing wrong with that, because with his height, no matter what coat she wore, it couldn't be helped. He reminded her again that it would get colder and asked if she could wear a coat. She immediately threw it over her shoulders and thanked the Duke of Manzalt. The girl immediately felt her husband's warmth and noticed that it was warm. The servants put things on the reindeer so the couple could rest during this time. While resting, the Duchess approached Fessarn and asked what a reindeer meant. At first, he was surprised that the girl did not know these words, but then he understood why they ride normal horses in the capital. The guard said that it is so cold in these places that common horses cannot stand it, and they freeze to death. Jack joined the conversation with the idea that they would first tame the reindeer and dogs and then harness them to sleds. From these words, Symphony realized that there was also a sled next to the deer. Then she asked if she could pet the reindeer, and Jack warned her that the animal was very sensitive. As she approached, the girl realized how big the local deer were and asked if they were strong. The boy began to praise the animals and even added that men praise them. He suddenly offered to hunt a deer as a wedding gift, but Fezarn began dragging him away. While Jack was demonstrating how important the deer was for a marriage, Manzalt appeared behind the guards. When they noticed him, Fezarn covered his face, as if he did not know Jack, and his companion did not have a childish fear. He tried again to talk about the importance of reindeer for his excellency, but with a trembling voice. The blonde added that she saw Manzalt out of the corner of her eye while training and praised his body. She would probably have said something else, but Fezarn had already pulled him away from the Duchess. The Duke apologized for this behavior of the guards and promised to speak seriously with them about this matter. The Duchess looked at her husband with a kind look and said that nothing terrible had happened, because she did not say it out of malice. Meanwhile, the man noticed that Symphony had become happier. He explained it because she had never seen such animals before. After a few minutes, the blonde asked if all sleds were made this way. Manzalt replied that the sled in front of him had been modified so that people could ride on it. If sleds in the north are made in different ways and come in different shapes, then you can remake them as you wish. After these considerations, Symphony asked if it was difficult to get this sled. The man replied that every family has a sled. They are so common that children learning to walk are immediately taught to carry them. The blonde said that was very good, but her husband did not understand her. Then she explained that if everyone is so familiar with the sled, then there will be many people who can carry it. He still did not understand what they were talking about, so he asked again what the meaning of this was. The girl looked at him mischievously and said that he would soon see everything for himself. After some time, they reached the northern lands, to the castle of the Manzalt family. Seeing such a beautiful castle up close, Symphony was amazed by its power. Manzalt turned to say something, but noticed his wife trembling and asked if she was cold. This time, she confirmed his conjectures and added that the winters in the capital were not that cold. That area enjoys favorable conditions, but the locals do not appreciate it at all. Symphony noted mentally that this was clearly visible by observing Mercy's behavior. But even despite this, the Manzaltans' hatred for outsiders was very deep. When they entered the castle, they were greeted by a servant who asked if there had been any inconvenience on the way. The Duke replied that even if there were, it would be better than looking at the vile faces of the imperial family. From the servant's behavior, the Duke immediately realized that he wanted to start complaining. So he stopped him. For the sake of the matter, he ordered his new companion, now his wife, to be introduced. The uncle bowed and introduced himself as Aiden, and also added that he was in charge of managing the castle. The girl was happy to meet him and also said her name, and he suggested that they address him using the family name. They understood everything and immediately thanked both the Duke and the others. Then Aiden asked if the couple had had dinner and said he had asked the chef to prepare the meal. The Duke interrupted him and told him that his wife should take a bath first. Aiden had prepared everything in advance, knowing how difficult it would be for the lady in such a vile place. As expected, no one likes the fact that the Duke's wife is from the capital. And now she would have to endure their cold reception every day. He suddenly stopped the flow of bad thoughts, consoling himself with the fact that such a vagrant would not stop her. Symphony considered this a trifle, only because her life was starting from scratch. That same day, she confidently entered her room after a shower, thinking no one was there. But when she heard Manzalt's voice, she got scared, and her husband asked why she was so surprised. She replied that she hadn't thought at all that he would come directly to her room. The Duke objected and said that this was also his room. According to him, he and Symphony would live in the same room and sleep in the same bed. He considered it natural for a husband and wife to live in the same room and asked if this was the case in the capital. The girl confirmed this fact and wanted to clarify a situation that happened a few hours ago. Then her husband went somewhere, so she thought they would live in different rooms. The Duke himself argued that there was only one bathroom in this room, so he went to the training room's bathroom. And yet, if Symphony knew this, she would have already dried her hair. The man remembered that it was the blonde who proposed to him and asked if anything suited her. He also added that if his wife felt uncomfortable, he could prepare a separate room for her. The Duchess knew that of all the duties of aristocrats, producing heirs was the most important. But since they got married, it wouldn't work just sleeping holding hands. Of course, she had been mentally preparing for this for a long time. But she did not fully understand the whole situation. Her thoughts were interrupted by Manzalt, who advised her not to strain herself if she didn't want to. To tell the truth, Symphony had never shared a room with anyone before. But now they still have to live together, so they need to get used to it. After several minutes of silence, the man noticed that his wife was too thin. And she should gain weight. The girl was so surprised by these words that she clasped her hands over her chest. She realized that these were the words of the man who had just married her. The offended Duchess replied that he himself was in such good shape that he could not complain. The man remembered that a true lady should not make such comments. Symphony tried to defend herself by saying that he started talking about her appearance. But the Duke said that he was not actually talking about her appearance. Glancing sideways at her husband, she explained that he was the one who thought so. But someone else might perceive it completely differently. The Duchess also asked to be explained what he meant, and it turned out that it was cold. Seeing Symphony's physique, the Duke understood why she was trembling so much from the cold. He was concise and only added that thin people are sensitive to cold. After thinking for a while, the girl decided to say that she had noticed something for a long time. The blonde approached and asked if her husband had noticed that he was very easy to misunderstand. Manzalt asked if they were really referring to him and received an affirmative answer. The blonde added that the Duke, surprisingly, turned out to be a very kind person. She immediately remembered whose fault the deep scar on Symphony's hand was. And she, in turn, remembered how the man lent her his coat. Their first meeting did not go very well, but it can be safely said that Manzalt is cruel to strangers. But in relation to his family and friends, he is quite generous. This is a man who clearly distinguishes between enemies and allies. Symphony felt that she had a place to call home. The Duke noticed the smile that appeared on her face because of this thought and asked what caused that smile. The girl sweetly crossed her hands behind her back and replied that she wanted everything to turn out well for them. After this sentence, the man brought his hand to his forehead because he did not understand her thought. But she looked at him again with burning eyes and repeated her wish that they would succeed. That evening, the couple had dinner at a large table. Aiden said that due to the rush, the menu turned out to be quite simple, and he wished them bon appetit. When he left, the Duke asked what his wife planned to do here from today. She replied that she had already thought about the potential of these lands, and the man asked again what she understood now. On the one hand, some things were already clear, but on the other hand, there were also incomprehensible moments. Manzalt still could not understand it, and Symphony kept thinking about it. It would not have been possible to do this in advance, because the blonde did not have enough information about Manzalt. The husband noted that this is something weak for a person who sees the future. Bringing the glass to his mouth, he explained that he only saw the future in general terms. And after taking a sip, he realized that this alcohol turned out to be much stronger than he thought. But still, he was much more interested in the question of when the future she promised him would arrive. Symphony did not give an exact answer, only stated that it would arrive a little sooner if the Duke helped her. The husband agreed, but pointed out that he expected a good result. From a conversation with his wife, he realized how easily she answered questions. This was because the girl was absolutely sure of success in her endeavors. A few minutes later, she asked if she could use the Manzalt library and received an affirmative answer. And she also needed a maid from someone who was born in Manzalt and knew its basic characteristics well. Basics. Based on such wishes, the man pointed out that the Duchess is not ashamed of her demands. But since the Duke decided that he would trust her, he promised that he would arrange everything as quickly as possible. Her requests did not end there. She wanted her husband to find a person. Manzalt got a little angry, but still asked what kind of person she needed to find. This was Prren. Until recently, he managed the Techian trading company. The man was confused by the fact that this was until recently. She explained that he had been working as an intermediary for Duke Tiardrop's daughter for the last 5 years. But that a purge was needed to consolidate the status of the new daughter. Her husband knew that getting rid of some people should not be a problem for Tiardrop. The Duchess looked down and confirmed this fact, but her husband still did not understand why she wanted to find a dead man. The problem was that, according to her words, Prren was not dead. He is playing dead and just waiting for the right moment. On the one hand, he faked his death, but there were some nuances. The fact is that Symphony discovered that an assassination attempt was being prepared against him. And he took advantage of this opportunity. And all this happened only thanks to her ability to see the future. After another silence, the Duke finally asked what actions were expected of him. Symphony just wanted them to bring Prren to Manzalt because he has excellent skills as a merchant. As you know, the basis of any power is money, and it is necessary to rule a country, as well as to wage war. Now Manzalt put his hands on his chin and asked again if the blonde had any assumptions. He immediately noticed that his wife had a headache from drinking too much and advised her to lie down. The girl tried to get up from the chair on her own, but it happened that she fell onto the Duke. Of course, she apologized for this behavior, arguing that she had never drunk to the point of intoxication. During this sentence, she briefly recalled all the moments while they were traveling to the northern lands. But today was such a special day that Symphony wanted to drink. When the blonde got up, she looked at her husband's face and said that the smile suited him very well. That night, when the moon shone through the window, the Duke woke up and looked at his new wife again. He sighed deeply and mentally noted that he had gotten involved with a very strange woman. It seemed to him that his wife was so beautiful and intelligent that she deserved to become empress. The Duke watched her for a long time while she slept, and at some point the blonde began to beg her father for something. He immediately remembered the words that Symphony did not need his love, but only the status of empress. He also remembered how composed she behaved in front of him. At dawn, the Duke had already left his room, and Symphony was still calling her father. After a while, the blonde herself woke up and noticed that the Duke was not in bed. She firmly knew that there was no time to waste, and she had to start preparing now. There was such a rush because from that day on, Symphony's real work began. As soon as she moved away from the bed, she immediately heard a very familiar voice. It was Mercy, and the Duchess did not expect at all that she would be the person who knew the peculiarities of Manzalt well. Without wasting time, Mercy immediately apologized for the incident that occurred in the capital. Symphony said that everything was fine and asked the maid to raise her head. In fact, it was wrong to scold her like that from the beginning. Mercy declared there that until the Duchess said she forgave her, she would not raise her head. The girl replied that her forgiveness would depend on how she showed herself in the future. To begin with, the blonde invited her to answer some questions about the history of Manzalt. Of course, Mercy agreed, but warned that she did not know if she could give a complete answer. The Duchess comforted her by saying that the Duke had sent her precisely because he knew the answers to her questions. She immediately showed the maid the open book and asked what the difference was between the two things. Seeing the familiar letters, she immediately realized that they were talking about straw boots and spikes. Mercy explained that straw boots are worn over shoes on snowy days, and that spiked boots are a more efficient version of boots. This is done because straw boots are not suitable in slippery places, and spikes allow walking on ice and climbing on icy surfaces. Since these spikes are durable and made of metal, they are more expensive. Therefore, metal spikes require the right technology, blacksmiths who know how to do it. Symphony asked if there were such people in the duchy, and Mercy immediately warned her that they might misunderstand her. She thinks there are many who call themselves masters, but in reality, there is only one skilled craftsman. His name was Martin Brown, and the man's last name confused the blonde a little. It turned out that he was Mercy's grandfather. The maid immediately argued vigorously that she was not announcing him because he was her grandfather. Since his granddaughter recommended him without hesitation, Symphony was sure that he was very skilled. But first of all, she needs to learn more about Manzalt. She has a good teacher. So it won't take her long. And in their conversation, she asked to tell her some things. A few days later, Manzalt asked what his wife had been doing all these days. After learning about her free time, he assumed that the blonde had plenty of time. Sibis suggested that there was something she firmly believed in. While the Duke pondered this question, Sibis mentally noted that His Excellency had married so suddenly. He was very interested in what the Duke of Manzalt was thinking now. His thoughts were interrupted by the man with his question, what about that man named Prren? Traces of his presence were found in the village of Prren. The probability that he is alive is very high. The Duke ordered to find out more about Prren and bring him directly to the castle. A few days later, Mona Salt suddenly called his wife to one of the castle rooms. Seeing the blonde man there, she immediately threw herself into his arms with joy. Symphony was very happy that Prren was fine and asked if it was difficult for him. He replied that it was not very difficult because for someone who escaped, he lived very well. Her joy was interrupted by Mona Salt, who said that a touching reunion had taken place. The girl realized and thanked her husband for finding Prren. According to him, it was not that difficult, and moreover, it was part of the success of his plan. Since the blonde was next to Symphony, the Duke had nothing to worry about. And the Duchess could get to work. As they left, the husband looked angrily at their intertwined hands, but said nothing about it. To be honest, the blonde was surprised because she never thought she would have to depend on the Duke of Manzalt. Moreover, due to all the situations, she had to take a small risk. Symphony handed him a notebook with information and notes about the Manzalt lands. Immediately, he quickly and carefully read all the ideas and conjectures. Upon finishing his reading, Prren asked if such progressive ideas would be accepted here. The Duchess remembered that the path of pioneers will always be difficult. Prren did not want to talk about it, but he had to remind her that Symphony was no longer the Duke's daughter. And if her plan fails, no one will defend her this time. Then the blonde got up from his chair and asked what happened while he was gone. But without waiting for an answer, he pointed out that the prediction of her future was already a somewhat strange phenomenon. The most important thing was that, according to Prren, Symphony looked like a man who really wanted to die. Here the Duchess bowed her head and decided to tell her long dream. In that dream, Prren died of sudden death as if they had wanted to kill him for a long time. And Symphony in this dream clung to her departing father, who was constantly in a hurry to get somewhere. When the girl woke up, the same thing actually began to happen. From such a quick narration of information, Prren did not understand how this could happen. As difficult as it is to admit, Symphony is the one who knows the secrets of Tiardrop's daughter best. And if bad rumors start circulating about her, she will be the first person to be suspected. Consequently, they will want to kill the blonde so that she suffers severe torture. But this desire will extend not only to Symphony, but also to Prren. Therefore, the girl must become the kind of person to whom her father and family can do nothing. Unless, of course, the Duchess wants to spend her life running away and hiding. She gave Prren permission not to participate in this plan if he was going to keep complaining. The boy with glasses asked what she would do with the plan if he refused. Duchess Manzalt was firmly convinced that the boy would not refuse. Hearing such a statement, the blonde brought her hand to her forehead and asked to be told more about the prophetic dream. When Symphony returned to the room, her displeased husband was waiting for her, who pointed out to her that she had been there too long. In response, the wife said that they talked a little longer than she expected. This answer was followed by a heavy silence, but the girl asked him to say what he thought. Not at all. He asked if Prren was her lover, and Symphony was surprised by this question. He also suggested that he might be mistaken, and his wife immediately confirmed it. One might have suspected others, but not Prren, and rightly so. The fact is that he has elven blood, and in reality, he is much older than he looks. But it was a secret, and it could not be revealed, so Symphony said that she had certain preferences. She does not like skinny men, but muscular ones who are good with a sword, and who can lift heavy things with ease. And men who only look weak in appearance will not be to Symphony's taste. The girl continued to say that she and Prren had a completely different relationship. But Manzalt interrupted her. He said that his wife was so calm that it seemed strange. When an unknown man approaches her, surprise is a natural reaction. But Manzalt is not a stranger to her. It turns out that for some reason, he does not consider her a woman. Moreover, if Symphony undresses now, the Duke will not even raise an eyebrow. The blonde understands well the difference between personal and business relationships. So her husband has nothing to worry about. Since there were many things planned for tomorrow, the girl suggested going to bed early. In fact, the Duchess of Manzalt did not want to talk about work here, but she had to. All because she would like to know the Duke's opinion on something. The girl wondered what her husband thought about building roads in Manzalt. According to the man, the blonde did not fully understand the peculiarities of the northern lands. He knew that in Manzalt there was so much snow that if you got distracted a little, you could take the wrong path. And yet, the Duchess proposes to build roads in this area. In the capital, canals were dug everywhere, through which they began to transport goods by boat. So Manzalt also needs to improve the transport system. The man agreed with this statement, but recalled that it would not be very easy. The wife replied that he simply thought so, and that was why all the roads were in this condition. This excited Manzalt a little, and he asked if she had a prepared plan. Then he asked if the Duke had seen lights in the capital's streets that people did not light one by one. All the lights are interconnected, and as long as there is fuel, they light up immediately. Then the husband asked what to do with transport, but the answer to this question was ready. Since in Manzalt everyone, regardless of gender and age, uses sleds. It is enough to build roads for sleds. The Duchess simply wanted to employ ordinary people and give them jobs, because in Manzalt, for a long time, there have been few job options. Agriculture was impossible due to frost and infertile lands. Everyone, except those lucky enough to get a job in the castle, generally stayed hunting or working as mercenaries. Then the Duke wondered how to make the lanterns that Symphony had just talked about. Luck did not abandon them in this case either, because there are many skilled blacksmiths in Manzalt. He was also interested in the issue of mana stones used as fuel. Duke Tiardrop donated land to his daughter as thanks. If you look from the outside, it seems that this is just a picturesque place, but underground there is something valuable. The mana stones underground create a highly concentrated mana current that prevents living beings from inhabiting these lands. Apart from Symphony, no one in the world knows the real price of this land. Because of this, the husband looked down on his wife and asked why she had not told him this before. But if she had said so, perhaps it would have been easier for her to reach an agreement with him. Now Manzalt reacted completely differently. This is a person who calmly watched the blood flowing from her in the past. But Symphony, like her husband, needed a lot of trust. She looked him straight in the face with kind eyes and declared that she could trust him. And she promised that she would do everything possible so that he would not regret choosing this blonde. The next day, Prren notified them that he had developed a plan for building roads. Looking at it, Manzalt immediately pointed out a very dangerous place for the road. He said that avalanches often occur in that place, and it would be better to pave the road a little differently. Logically, the map still needed to be corrected, and Symphony entrusted this task to Prren. She also asked the Duke if there were other places where adjustments were needed. When the man started to appear, his wife's long hair bothered him, and he stopped. The girl immediately apologized, and Prren suggested tying her hair in a ponytail. As she tied them, the girl felt as if she had returned to childhood. The Duchess, with her hair tied up, suggested continuing, but her husband remained silent. She asked if everything was all right, and immediately received a positive answer. Bit cold. Symphony argued that it would be impossible to install all the lights at once, because she would first need to secure funding. Her finger pointed to the map, where the border of Manzalt and Orsenta was located. This was the agricultural region of Orsenta, but the man did not understand how this related to funding. Symphony added that the basic rule of trade is to buy something and then sell it at a high price. There was a good harvest in Orsent this year, so grain is sold cheaply. So Manzalt said that if the harvest is good, then there is no problem with food. And that means no one will buy it from them at high prices. In response to this, the girl recalled her prediction, which said that in a year there would be a plague epidemic. And then a locust invasion. The duchy itself has good conditions for storing food due to the climate. So Symphony plans to buy as much as possible. The man asked if they were preparing for the initial difficulties, and the wife confirmed it. She also added that if everyone gets sick, no profit will be made. But if the duchy has medicines prepared in advance, this will not be a problem. Just like with food, the Duchess wants to prepare a supply of medicines. And the local climate will help keep them fresh. To tell the truth, the guys do not have much time, so Symphony proposed dividing the organization into several parts. She wanted to build a base in each village, headed by a leader, something like branches. If we talk about trading companies. And people are also supposed to rest, but things can be transported as much as you want. Instead of one person doing all the moving work, you can divide it among several people. Large trading companies can operate because they are efficiently organized. And like a network, divided into separate sections. It looks like a rather clumsy structure, but if something goes wrong, you can isolate one section and solve the problem. The point that Symphony marks on the map will be the center of everything, but she will make a small base in each village. Lanterns will show the way, and the base will provide a place to rest and store goods. But the problem was money, and then Manzalt asked if $10 million would be enough. This figure surprised both Symphony and Prren, and the man added that if it suddenly wasn't enough, he would add more. Previously, the blonde already knew Manzalt's budget, but her husband said that Manzalt was not a poor state at all. He said that this money was earned by the blood and sweat of his subjects. The number of those working as mercenaries has increased not only because people simply have nothing to eat. His people not only do all sorts of dirty work, but also have to earn money while being discriminated against and humiliated. At first, Symphony thought that this was just superficial hostility towards the capital. But since she arrived in Manzalt, she realized that things were probably not that simple. She suddenly interrupted her thoughts and said that thanks to such generous funding, everything should go well, and she suggested starting to build lanterns. The bases need the longest time to prepare, so it would be better to prepare sleds for transporting goods and gather people at the same time. According to the Duke, few trading companies will be willing to cooperate with the duchy. Symphony replied that it would be necessary to attract these trading companies somehow. She also added that merchants are always looking for profit, so if they manage to spread rumors that they can make money with Manzalt, they will quickly take the bait. Observing the expression on her husband's face, she realized that he was not entirely convinced. He replied that objectively, there was nothing in Manzalt that could generate profit. The girl could not agree with her husband on this, because these lands are full of valuable resources. But no one notices. She suddenly decided to say that Prren had told her something about people's interest in Manzalt. It was necessary to attract this interest because the deeper the secret is buried, the more it excites the imagination. People will think that there must be treasures in unknown lands. Manzalt knew that his expectations would definitely not come true, because if there really were treasures, they would have been found long ago. The blonde began to talk about the fact that there is a treasure in the duchy that everyone living outside of it dreams of. These words greatly interested the man, and he asked what it was. The girl looked confidently at her husband and told him about a treasure called ice. Ice is a luxury in other regions, because due to the climate, making ice requires the power of mages and magical objects. She also asked him if the man knew why she was so desperate to know him when she arrived at his mansion in the capital. Of course, the Duke did not know the answer to such a question, and immediately asked why this was the case. The wife replied that this was only because she did not know how to get to his duchy. And most people probably didn't know either. After all, even if there is something valuable in Manzalt, trade is impossible if there are no means of transport. She pointed to the map and said that if there is a road, people will come. Hearing these ideas, Manzalt noticed that the blonde was not only thinking about selling something. Symphony confirmed it and added that it would be enough to create a trading company. Although his wife feels the importance of business development, she has not forgotten the main goal because everything is being done to get Brush to ascend to the imperial throne as soon as possible. In addition to the trading company, she plans to open a market so that not only they, but also the people living here can contribute to the enrichment of Mona Salta. Brush asked if he had understood correctly that his wife was going to introduce a transaction tax. To Symphony's great regret, it was too early to think about this proposal for the time being. She wants to exempt everyone from taxes for a while to attract merchants. Mentally, the girl understood that introducing taxes on their lands was a completely natural solution. But this may deter merchants from coming, and a tax exemption might help them. The Duke asked how they were going to enrich Manzalt if they did not impose taxes. The blonde replied that there was something in the duchy that was absolutely necessary for any transport. She plans to charge merchants for the use of local sleds. The man pointed out that it was not a bad idea, but his question was how attractive Manzalt would be to merchants. Symphony recalled what she had said earlier about the treasure found in Manzalt. She also firmly stated that great changes were coming for these lands. The next day, when the boy entered the girl's office, she asked him how things were going with the lanterns. The guy replied that the blacksmith turned out to be extraordinarily skilled and quickly made the lanterns in the required shape. The products have already been tested and approved for installation, which pleased the Duchess. Prren noted that he had never disappointed Symphony, and the girl confirmed it. They had to make many adjustments while working, and the blonde assumed it was because they were in a great hurry. But she really liked that everything worked out very well and in harmony. The blonde admitted that, to be honest, this surprised him, because the people in Manzalt are not the same as in the capital. Symphony called them savages abandoned by civilization, but the guy said that was too cheeky. He also added that he does not have to pretend that he does not think so, because she herself thought so before. And when he saw the people of Manzalt, he realized that they were the most common and current. And the dialogue was interrupted by a knock on the door, and Symphony assumed that Mercy had arrived. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the girl immediately asked how things were going regarding that task. The maid immediately began to apologize, and Symphony replied that nothing bad had happened. The last few days have been very busy, and that's why she put up with it, but now she's had enough. Prren asked if she would meet the chief treasurer in person or somewhere else. Almost at the door, she replied that she was going to ask for a repair. Because when a problem arises with a product, you need to contact the person who owns it. It was only when she entered the training ground that she heard Jack's voice. He greeted her and asked if she could find out why the Duchess had come to this dirty place. The blonde replied that she came to meet a person. Blushing, Jack said that they probably got along so well because they had just gotten married. But he came to ask about the fact that the chief treasurer was constantly delaying the budget approval. The boy replied something to Symphony, and she was confused because he had called Sibis Shishi. He added that this is a nickname, and from this day on, the Duchess will know it. When it comes to money, Shishi becomes unusually treacherous and stubborn in the castle. He will not allow a single penny to be wasted. And he calculates so fast that, with a slight misdeed, you can lose half your salary. The girl asked if people were outraged by this, but it was useless, because that is not the person who will listen. Shishi will not cut salaries without a reason. First, he will definitely find a reason and then torment the person. However, the time has come to say goodbye to these unhappy times, because the lady will put him in his place. Jack suggested not wasting time and directing Symphony to His Excellency, but the girl refused. After careful consideration, She realized that this was not as big a problem as she thought. Walking away in the opposite direction from Jack, she only said that she would have to reconsider the plan. When the Duchess was out of sight, the boys training in that place replied that she was very beautiful. Suddenly, the Duke appeared among them and asked who had just arrived at this place. Jack immediately replied that his wife had come with a question about the hookah. But suddenly, the blonde said she had changed her mind and quickly left here. Mona Salt, upon leaving the place, scratched her head and wondered what she was up to this time. Next, the action takes place in Sibis's spacious office. Without lifting her head, she asked him why he had come here. The girl explained that Mercy had recently returned with her, so she decided to look at him herself and find out when the budget would be approved. The man frowned and replied that her request was currently under consideration. The Symphony Lady said that His Excellency had already given the go-ahead, but Sibis said the project would need to be carefully examined. The Duchess did not fully understand the essence of these words, so she asked him what he meant. The blue-haired man said that the girl understood everything perfectly. The blonde denied this statement to the end, and Sibis got angry. He asked if the Symphony Lady knew how many years in advance she was requesting a budget. To the assertion that business requires money, Sibis replied that her plan was no different than if she were carrying water in a leaky bucket. Smiling, the girl asked him if it was too early to judge whether it was a waste or not. In response, the man handed her a paper and explained that it contained Manzalt's 10-year budget. He also added that, thanks to the Symphony Lady, 10 whole years of life had left this country. She disagreed with this statement because she believed she had added 10 years to them. If you believe Sibis's words, to compensate for the money he spent, people will have to work hard for 20 years. Placing her hand on the papers, the girl said that the man was not considering the option of increasing residents' income. This was impossible because not many merchants would buy ice, and if they inflated the price, there would be even fewer. In other words, she meant that this is not a profitable venture, and no one will come to Manzalt for ice. He added that without trade, sleigh rental would also not generate profit, given the amount and the current ice prices. The symphony stated that ice is the beginning, and then it will be much more interesting. The main advantage of ice is that its production does not require special costs. After all, if the merchandise gets lost on the way, or there is a defective batch, they will be able to minimize losses. According to the Duchess, ice of any weight and size can be obtained without problems. She also added that everyone here knows how to drive a sleigh, but no one has used this experience in the ice-selling business, and it will serve as excellent practice for them. Sibis reiterated his opinion that ice prices are too high. Unexpectedly, the blonde announced that they would sell ice at a price of 1/100th of the market price. The chief treasurer asked what would happen if they didn't buy the ice even if they didn't lower the price. But the girl was convinced that the lower the price, the more they would buy. Because all over the world ice is used only as an ingredient in dishes. Ice is an expensive commodity. Only in Manzalt did they think of keeping food frozen. The cheaper the product, the more uses it will find and spread throughout the world like wildfire. And if all goes well, ice will even enter circulation among the merchant guild. The pessimist Sibis replied that ice doesn't last long and melts in the heat. But that was even better, because when the ice melts, they will have to buy a new batch. The treasurer said that no matter how cheap the ice is, one day people will realize how ineffective it is and stop buying it. And Symphony replied that it is not that difficult to extend the shelf life of ice, and pointed her finger to the side. The girl said it was located right in Manzalt. She asked if Sibis thought this was a bit strange. After all, even without a chimney, the difference between the temperature inside the castle and the outside is obvious. It is not necessary to completely stop the melting process. It is enough to extend its shelf life so that it can be used without problems. The most important thing is that Manzalt has the necessary technology for this. It seems Shishi has not yet realized that the Duchess did not come here to make a scene, and to ensure that he is the right treasurer who can calculate profits just by looking at the numbers. Leaning over the papers, she stated that she was not going to spend a lot of money, but wanted to invest exactly what this land deserved. Sivis asked why the blonde was trying so hard to convince him that she was right. And she replied that she considered it the most reasonable method. He was the person she needed because he knew perfectly how the laws of Manzalt worked. He also knew how to use these laws for his own benefit. The symphony lady needed a person like him. The man adjusted his glasses and said that for the moment he could not continue working. However, as long as this does not interfere with his main business, he can advise her on matters of interest to her. These words made the Duchess very happy, who said that Sivis would help her a lot. After this dialogue, Brush entered the office and said that the Duchess was looking for him. As they walked down the hall, Manzalt said it was better to play it safe and asked what was happening with the budget. Symphony replied that everything was already settled, and when they met, Sivis turned out to be a very reasonable person, willing to listen to her. At first she thought that since that man was so stingy and got to the bottom of every detail, then the conversation would be very direct. She immediately asked if that seemed like a compliment to him and said that, in general, he was a capable person. In fact, the Duchess could use someone who knows the current situation in other regions. At that time, the situation was very changeable, so the girls needed people who could think for themselves. That's why she decided it wouldn't be superfluous to consult him from time to time. Manzalt allowed his wife to do as she pleased, because Sivis was not only his subordinate, but also hers. She also recalled that they had previously discussed the fact that husband and wife are equal. He looked kindly at his wife and thought about how beautiful she was. His thoughts were interrupted by the girl's words that the man had finally decided to trust her. In response to this, he only told her not to try so hard with her facial expression. At first, it seemed to him that Symphony was smiling too much, but it turned out that this is just another habit of the Duke's daughter. The Duke noticed that the blonde wore a mask of calm to keep everything under control. The moment he said this, Symphony realized that this man had managed to truly see her. The next day, Prren went to the Duchess's office and saw that she was not feeling well. He explained this by saying that there were many things to do, that she wanted to finish them as quickly as possible. And he thought she would fall asleep right there. But in fact, today the girl did not want to meet her husband one-on-one. Sitting next to Symphony, he asked what happened between them. He also reminded her that she always told him her problems before. The Duchess began her story with her husband telling her that he wears a mask of calm and tries to pretend that everything is fine. The blonde, without thinking, said she didn't see anything wrong with that, and this angered Symphony a little. He added that the young woman had long been trying to be ideal and please everyone in everything. Perhaps she is seeking recognition from the people around her on an instinctive level. The girl put her hand on her head and stated that she did not need to prove herself to anyone. She still sees that terrible dream. She cannot forget it. No matter how hard she tries, she cannot help but remember it. Without even realizing it, she suddenly finds herself back in that cold dungeon. Suddenly, the blonde admitted that Manzalt was right about her pretending. Prren understands her feelings, so he asked her not to take on too much. Then he asked if things were getting extreme. Prren would stop her. He replied that there was nothing wrong with asking someone other than himself for help. He also pointed out that the young woman hides her emotions very well, so it is difficult to notice if something bothers her. Honestly, the symphony lady was not reluctant to get along with Manzalt. He wasn't as bad as the rumors said. She didn't want their relationship to go too far. Because, unlike a contract, where limits and conditions are clearly visible, feelings are very changeable. Symphony also added that Brush does not see her as a woman at all. That same evening, Prren brought documents to the girl and promised to bring her a blanket too. A few hours later, she heard footsteps and told him to come in because reading had taken longer than expected. She also added that there was no need to knock, but he could have entered right away. She turned her head wondering if Prren was back to his old jokes, but instead of Prren, Manzalt was in the office. who said that the symphony lady had known Prren for a long time, just as he knew her. Stuttering, the blonde asked why her husband was there, and he replied that the blonde was telling him about her vacation spot. Smiling sweetly and saying something in response, she mentally realized that she had been caught. The husband asked if there was any pending business, and the girl showed him the scribbled papers. He took some of these papers and said he would help, so Symphony thanked him. The girl felt very uncomfortable and wondered if she was the only one who felt this way. Suddenly, Brush spoke about the chairs nearby. The blonde explained this by saying that they needed to discuss something. Symphony added that Prren was sitting at another table, perpendicular to hers. After a heavy silence, the Duke noticed that the office was very quiet. Then he decided to ask if this recent story bothered his wife. Observing the expression on her face, Manzalt noticed that the girl was smiling again. Because when she restrains herself, the corners of her lips rise a little higher than in a normal smile. After smoothing her hair, Symphony stated that her condition could not be judged by this. No matter how hard they tried, according to the Duke, it was always the same smile. Brush was not trying to judge her at all, he simply wanted to make sure he was right. Suddenly, he leaned towards her and told her that the blonde was right, because he was beginning to trust her. Since their joint business had just begun, Symphony asked if it was too early to draw such conclusions. Then she told him to look out the street, where there were already streetlights. The Duke said that tomorrow they could go together to a nearby town. Extending his hand, he added that sometimes it is useful to walk in the fresh air. Since the girl did not respond to his gesture with her hand, Manzalt assumed she did not want to. But then she extended her hand and said she wanted to check how much these lands had changed. She found it hard to believe that the great Duke could have such rough hands. She took the hand where she had previously left a deep scar and asked if it still hurt. She brought her hands to her chest and said that her hands were very different from hers. In fact, this scar does not compare to the real pain that Symphony has known. While the girl was thinking about this, Manzalt again told her that a smile appeared on her face. The blonde had no idea how her husband managed to distinguish it, but the truth was that she was used to hiding her emotions. Everyone told her that the lady of the Tiardrop family should be like a beautiful flower growing in a greenhouse. But in fact, the Symphony lady was just an obedient doll. The husband realized that the girl was trapped in the role of the Duke's daughter, unable to live as she wanted. Because the Duke's actions are no different from the actions of a child playing with his doll. Manzalt looked at her with pity and said that the role of a mere substitute was not suitable for Symphony. These words angered the young woman, who furiously took her hand from her face. She already knew everything, so the Duke did not need to talk about it. It seemed to her that her husband was deliberately annoying her, but it seemed that the blonde did not fully understand that she was something valuable. Not long ago, Symphony's father began to look for her, as the new daughter had not shown any signs since her debut. Symphony realized that, of course, in this situation, her father began to look for her. After all, if the father spent money on her and received nothing in return, he would not look for her now. By this, Manzalt meant that his wife could hate the ducal house without remorse of conscience. Precisely because the girl is ashamed, in any situation she tries to justify her father. It is better to immediately understand her emotions than to constantly suppress them. The man added that it is difficult for everyone at first, but then you get used to it. He noticed that Symphony no longer wears a coat when she is in the castle. These seemingly ordinary words made tears fill her tender face. And her distracted husband didn't even offer her a handkerchief, he just stared. A few hours later, the girl opened her eyes and could not understand how she returned to the room. Suddenly, she saw her husband putting a t-shirt over his naked body. In that unclear moment, many things became clear in her short-term memory. She tried with all her might to understand why he remained silent. Suddenly, the man turned to her and asked if she liked the show. In response to this, Symphony waved her hands, but Manzalt saw that she was just pretending to be asleep. And he asked her why she was so surprised, because usually it is she who stuns the Duke. The girl immediately asked when he managed to do something, but the man reminded her of his words that she did not see him as a man. From these words, it can be said that the symphony lady can look at him as much as she wants. But then the Duke got up and said he wouldn't eat it, and also recommended preparing for a trip. When they were almost ready, the husband said they should dress warmer because it was cold there. Suddenly, the girl decided not to go because she was not satisfied with her own appearance. To comfort his wife, Manzalt said that to him she was always beautiful. He also didn't miss the opportunity to say that her face was slightly swollen. Symphony considered these words as her husband's indifference to how much her face swells. And how beautifully she dresses. Suddenly, the Duchess got the idea to hide her face with a hat. She argued this by saying that, at the first meeting with the villagers, she should look impeccable. Because it will not benefit them at all if the Duke's wife appears with a tear-stained face. Of course, Manzalt listened to his wife, but when they were alone, she did not need the hat. He also stroked the blonde and said he liked her green eyes. That same day, the couple was in the village, and the Duke was constantly worried whether Symphony was cold. The girl felt a little strange, because the image in her head was coming true. To be honest, the man also had doubts, because although his wife can see the future, it is hard to believe such a thing. But looking at the cheerful games of the children, I want to believe in the symphony, because for the first time the duchy is so lively. Manzalt interrupted her dreams, because in such a harsh place there are few reasons for joy. There are almost no crops and a barren land with fierce monsters, where only warriors survive. In such a hellish place, people have few options on what to do. Every day they fight hunger, they don't even know tomorrow. They say that if you die in battle, you will end up in the lands of the warriors, so people here do not fear death. But the Duke himself suggests that this is a simple superstition that makes their lives easier. Suddenly, the stern man decided to tell the story of his father, who died honorably in battle. Having become the foot of the imperial family, he went to the battlefield for the sake of the hungry in our lands. But his death was not compensated in any way. The symphony lady knew that he used the inhabitants as a useful tool. But her thought did not reach the end. Manzalt interrupted her by commenting on her sad face, and added that the lives of the great dukes of Manzalt were very similar. The man himself does not seek sympathy, but simply tells the facts, so the blonde should not be sad. The reason why the Duke is so eager to become emperor is not so good. He just wants to save his people from hunger, because nothing can be grown in these lands. But when Symphony said that these frozen lands had potential, her husband thought she was strange. The girl wanted to mention the future she sees, but something inside her did not allow it. She only suggested that perhaps they lived in different conditions. To be honest, Manzalt looks at things that are obvious to the symphony lady from a completely different angle. Also in the duchy, the blonde looked at this place from a different angle. The husband wanted to keep the dialogue going, but was interrupted by the voice of a local blacksmith. It was Martin Brown, the best blacksmith in all of Manzalt. He was immensely happy to meet his lady outside the castle. He immediately reported to the Duke about the production of the lanterns and how ideal they turned out. If you believe the blacksmith's words, of all the installed lanterns, none broke. The Duchess was so happy that she praised Martin for 5 minutes. Taking advantage of the moment, he asked the lady if she would like to visit his forge. When the girl entered, she saw hundreds of lanterns for all of Manzalt, which Martin promised to finish by the weekend. The blacksmith explained these incredible lanterns by saying that for a long time he could not show his talent to the fullest. But now he was enthusiastic about the work. The Duke listened to them silently, and Martin declared that work is the best remedy against boredom. Suddenly, he remembered again that he had prepared a gift for the lady herself. He called it a small thing, but still this small thing was made only for her. Initially, Martin wanted to donate it through mercy, but he realized it would be better to do it in person. In the end, it turned out that the girl was holding a dagger in her hands for self-defense. The author of the product added that in Manzalt, people do not walk without weapons. The dagger was small but sharp and would definitely not fail at the right moment. Observing the expression on Symphony's face, the master thought that she did not like the gift. The blonde replied negatively to this statement, and Martin was very happy. She thanked the blacksmith and told him she would take good care of it. Brown further declared that he would do anything the lady asked of him. You couldn't tell from him, but this man was a reliable person. You just had to look at his muscles. The Duke immediately realized that another boast was happening at that moment. And he said it out loud. Martin tried to deny it, but Manzalt had never seen trustworthy people boast. Immediately, Symphony's husband said it was time for them to leave, because they still had many places to visit. Symphony did not understand why they were leaving so quickly, which stunned the Duke. She asked if her husband would mind if she took a closer look at the forge. The girl also added that if the Duke is in a hurry, then she can stay here alone. The blacksmith offered to take them directly to the castle, according to him. He is an excellent sleigh driver. The blonde asked if this would be a problem for Martin, and he replied that it was like taking a walk after dinner. Suddenly Brown noticed that the lady was very thin and suggested having lunch together. Manzalt looked at them with a stony face because his wife suggested he return alone. The Duchess stated that she could not refuse such a tempting offer. And Martin kept talking about dinner and his traditional wild boar. He was as sure as possible that the lady would like his favorite dish. Suddenly, Manzalt said that he hadn't tasted Martin's wild boar in a long time, so he would stay. His explanation was that such hospitality should not be refused under any circumstances. The man held out his hand to his wife and suggested they go to lunch together. A few minutes later, the Duke and Duchess were at the home of the blacksmith and his wife. Martin's wife's name was Dorothy, a hospitable girl in a wheelchair. While the guests were undressing, Brown announced that he would have to wait a little while before cooking the wild boar. Manzalt said he would help him in the process, which surprised Symphony. Cooking a whole wild boar required strength, and the lady needed to rest. Symphony sat at the table next to Dorothy and asked her what she was doing. Her answer that she makes her own clothes amazed the Duchess. The blonde said this woman had golden hands, but she replied that there was nothing complicated about it. The vest hanging in the hallway was made by Mercy when she was very small. The residents of Manzalt do everything themselves. Dorothy was quite skilled, so she sewed. Making clothes is not difficult at all. If you don't rush, everything will turn out well. Moreover, compared to other people, Dorothy had much more free time. Symphony pointed out that she had no talent for this, and that it was very surprising to see something like this happen. Unexpectedly, Dorothy suggested that the Duchess try sewing. All she had to do was cut the threads in a few places, and she also asked if the lady had ever tried sewing. After receiving the answer, she decided to demonstrate the technique slowly first. When the blonde tried her hand at a new business, she got the idea that she could make money by producing clothes. The girl also tried to estimate how many people are needed to develop a business. The woman replied that they would use aristocratic suits that only a few seamstresses could make. Of course, it would be great to make money from this, but it is unlikely that many people would want to wear such clothes. Moreover, the clothes must fit the buyer's body type. It would be more profitable to sell furs and leather, but for that you would have to catch the animals yourself. Therefore, you will not be able to make much money selling leather and furs. Due to the fact that young people become mercenaries, the woman is glad that Martin is working with His Highness. He still loves Manzalt, and Dorothy missed many things, which is why she lived here. Manzalt raised these people. They lived here their whole lives. The Symphony loves and hates this harsh place at the same time. The old woman agreed with these words of the Duchess, because she could not leave here for many reasons. She wants this land to change, but she knows that the world does not always work as she wants. However, children should not live like them. Children should be smarter. Symphony said that Mercy would probably be angry if she heard this, but when she spoke of her grandmother, she presented her as the greatest warrior in the world. Their dialogue could not continue because the men had already prepared the wild boar and called them to the table. When the Duchess looked at them, her husband was holding a large platter of wild boar, and Martin was holding glasses and plates. The blacksmith poured a red drink, resembling wine or grape juice, into everyone's glasses. And everyone started eating. The feast took place in a cozy atmosphere. All the guests chatted pleasantly. Later that evening, when bidding farewell to the Duke and Duchess, Martin promised to prepare more delicious dishes for their arrival. The wife promised to return without fail and gave the order to leave. On the way, Symphony said she was a little tired, but it was fun. Manzalt replied that there was nothing special about the gift they had given her. A gift is a gift, but Brown said that now they are also Manzalt. The Duke explained that now his wife's surname is also Mona Salt, and her name also includes Mona Salt. Next, the girl thanked her husband for inviting her on the trip. Suddenly, she decided to recall his words about how she was going to use him. She decided that from today, she would reject these words. At first, the blonde thought about how to rise in status based on her husband becoming emperor. But now the girl is not sure if she can use them as chess pieces and then throw them away. She also thought that seeing cheerful people made Manzalt greedy. She liked the duchy more and more, but her husband did not understand why she spoke like that about a land where not even a sprout could sprout. Even though it seems that this land is not suitable for anything, after all, people live here. The longer the Symphony lady stayed in this place, the more she liked the locals. The next morning, Prren reported that the number of merchants willing to work with ice was constantly growing. If the statistics do not stop growing, then no changes are expected on the way to their goal. This was beneficial, especially now that they are limiting agreements. To avoid major changes in Mona Salta's plan, it is necessary to limit the opening of borders. You can trade ice by sending it abroad, but the Symphony lady only allowed a certain number of transactions. Prren turned the page and said it would be a good idea to start preparing for the next step. Then the Duchess asked him if he had found exactly what she had recently requested. According to the blonde, it was easy to find, but it would not have been possible without the help of the boys. The girl straightened her bangs and said she would like to look at it. After looking, she said that if Prren did this, the children would be delighted. The Symphony lady also ordered to finish studying Manzalt and make sure there are no problems with the back. And the sleigh. The blonde briefly described the dream the lady was talking about, and the answer arrived. The answer was yes. She was interested and wanted to talk to the Duchess. The blonde also wanted to talk to Mr. Brown, but Mercy had not returned yet. She realized this and ordered to contact Civis and arrange a meeting with him. After receiving all the tasks, Prren did not leave, and Symphony asked him if he had anything else to say. It turns out he is closely following what the Duke is doing as a precaution. But the blonde already knew that Duke Tiardrop was looking for her all over the world. So she looked at him and warned him that if Prren still knew something, he should not be afraid to tell her. Suddenly, he began to talk about how the behavior of the Tiardrop family was somewhat different from the future she described. In fact, other important events will remain unchanged, and the second prince will take his place after the premature death of the crown prince. Duke Tiardrop was even mentioned as a possible candidate for emperor. But the throne would not be so easy to take. She hoped that Charietta would become the true successor of the family. Even before Symphony's death, the position of empress was vacant. And nothing will prevent her from becoming empress until they gather all their strength. The girl opened the book that had just been handed to her and was shocked by the news inside. It said that Lady Tiardrop Ducey was not doing her job well. She is in a situation where she has to prove her skills, and if she doesn't, a big question looms. Merchant Navy Tiardrop is a trade network previously run by Symphony, now owned by Charietta. The greatest achievement of the Tiardrop Duchy is the clear evidence of Charietta's skills. This was strange because it was time for Lady Tiardrop to propose a new venture. But no matter how smart Charietta tries to be, a forgery can never surpass the original. The Duchess was right if only her father had found Charietta earlier. Although conversely, one must start losing her from the beginning. The Symphony lady believed that the right to manage Tiardrop belonged to the Duchess of Tiardrop. When the blonde fought her for leadership, she could never defeat her. Of course, the girl appreciates Pren's judgment on this matter, but Lady Tiardrop at that time surpassed her in everything. Although the Duchess herself had never been in business before, Chariot was aware of all the trends. Perhaps the reason her father is looking for her lies in her unique and unconventional achievements. But if Duke Tiardrop had managed to give up his greed, he could have found someone else who could replace Symphony. When Prem asked what the Duchess would do, she replied that she would simply continue to observe them. Then the blonde suggested that he conduct a small investigation. She maintained that it would be very interesting to know their future actions. These words made Symphony sink into deep thought. If you put aside your emotions and think logically, then there is a high probability that their words were a lie. Moreover, there are not many factions large enough to cause the fall of Tiardrop. It was important to find out absolutely everything so that no unforeseen events would arise in the future. Taking the opportunity, the Symphony lady asked to check the people on the list. After reviewing the list, Prren asked if these people were Duke Tiardrop's inner circle. The girl had some doubts about this and wanted to check something. No matter how good Charietta was, she couldn't fool her father alone. Someone had to back her up. The next day, a meeting was arranged for the Symphony lady with Dorothy. The Duchess explained that she had called the old woman to discuss something with her. She believes that she will soon need a lot of clothes, so she wants to borrow Dorothy's skills. The old woman asked if she had a seamstress who sewed especially for her. But she didn't need a seamstress to make her clothes because she wanted to open a tailor shop. As can be seen, the Symphony lady's goal was to expand the market of Manzalt. They had to prepare because she would soon start attracting merchants. At that moment, the girl realized from Dorothy's face that there was some kind of problem. The problem was that managing a business would focus on winter clothing, which could be complicated. This was very possible, because from now on foreign merchants might visit Manzalt. People from warm regions are not used to the cold of Manzalt, because no matter how well they dress, they will never be that warm. If she makes clothes designed for adverse weather conditions, vendors coming to Manzalt will become regular customers. And again, Symphony realized from the expression on her face that there was some kind of problem. The old woman kept insisting that it would be difficult, but the Duchess had already foreseen everything. Even if the clothes run out, there might be enough material. And if the clothes don't sell, she will lose money. That's not good. But knowing the Symphony lady, she doesn't start working without weighing the risks. Furs and leather from Manzalt are not particularly valuable, so it would be more profitable to import peeling materials. The problem remains finding people who produce clothes, since it will be impossible to cope with the volume she needs. The blonde was not going to sell clothes, as Dorothy thought. After studying the documents, she realized that the Symphony lady wanted to lend clothes to merchants. It may not be possible elsewhere, but in Manzalt it is more useful than ever. Because to find in Manzalt, you need fur clothes. And merchants do not transport furs because they are bulky. As long as there are restrictions on the cargo that can be transported at the same time, the merchant will not want to transport excessive cargo. From a merchant's point of view, when he constantly has to pay all expenses, renting clothes will be an extremely profitable offer. But if you rent clothes to a large number of people, you will need many sizes. The Symphony lady replied that this could be achieved by creating a uniform clothing standard. By making clothes for different body types, a wider range of people will wear them. In the capital, nobles take their measurements, but common people buy ready-made clothes and wear them. All that remains is to add information about Manzalt to this material. During their long conversation, the tea got cold, and the lady asked Mercy to serve more tea. At first, there will be a lot of demand, but if you can maintain a certain amount of clothing, then there will be no more problems. In the future, replacing and repairing worn clothes will be her main task. While pouring another cup of tea, the Duchess asked if Dorothy had anything to add. The old woman only had one question, and it was because she needed this information. This was because the Duchess believed that Dorothy was the best person for the job. In the process of extracting information, she encountered an unexpected number. This was the number of war participants, A large number of losses can be observed among the inhabitants of Manzalt. And looking at this, she remembered Martin's wife's words about the transformation of the land. And so that children do not live like them, they should be more reasonable. She agreed because she knew what the people here were willing to do to survive. Even knowing that they would be used and discarded, they became mercenaries and went to war. The symphony has stumbled upon someone else's tragedy, and that is why she wants to empower her. Sibis said that Symphony did the right thing by entrusting the work to Miss Brown, because everyone else would follow such a famous warrior. Folding the papers, he added that there would be less aggression towards His Highness. When Miss Brown was famous, Sibis was very young, and whenever the topic of battles was mentioned, his personality was never left out. Then Symphony asked, what about those people who do not like her? In any case, His Highness brought her. And even if the girl makes a mistake, everything will be fine. The treasurer asked not to waste time and get to work quickly. The blonde noticed that he was in a bad mood today, but she did what he asked. And Sibis realized that the Duchess was showing him a plan for the whole year. Initially, it was the port cities that flourished as the main source of trade. But Manzalt was not like that. Of course, it will be convenient to prepare hotels and restaurants in advance for the influx of merchants. It was not a bad idea, but Manzalt's income is very modest and is used for reinvestment. So Symphony is thinking of letting a couple of merchants into her lands. Of course, they must be attracted, and a very tasty bait must be used. Sibis wanted to know what it was, but the girl said it was a secret. Suddenly, she called it a joke and promised to tell him when he came. At the same instant, the door was knocked on, and the Duke of Manzalt entered the office. He allowed Sibai to sit down, and Symphony suddenly realized that their conversation had lasted 2 hours. Of course, time flew by while talking to the treasurer. Manzalt asked what was happening with Mercy, but at that moment she left on business. Lately, she had been busy going back and forth between the Symphony lady and Miss Brown. And Prren took care of other matters, because an educated person always has a lot of things to do. The man wanted to say something, but could not formulate it. Then Symphony offered to speak, and at the same time reached out towards the Duke's neck. It turned out that she wanted to straighten his white tie with a stone. Blushing, the girl said she considered it necessary to correct it. The husband replied that everything was fine and adjusted his tie again. An important deal, and at some point, the man sitting opposite the Symphony lady began to attract her. She wondered when this happened. Manzalt is only a duke in name because he will soon become emperor. Of course, this does not mean that the blonde will leave with a sparkle in her eyes. It is better to make this a training. At the same time, the Duchess is not trying to look stupid, no matter who she is with. It is easy to recognize. Perhaps it is because of her unusually tall stature or her voice. Although it has nothing to do with her, she admits that she likes brash. But still, Symphony had no intention of falling in love with this man. They say that relationships are earned with great difficulty, but everything can collapse in one blow. The Symphony lady knows this better than anyone. Sibis interrupted her thoughts on this matter and asked what they were doing now. He asked to leave everything for later and tell him what was hidden behind the big bait. It turned out that in Manzalt, not far from the village, a gold mine was found. There is not much gold, but there is still a small amount. Everything will depend on the amount of work. Perhaps once they take mining seriously, this should last a year or even 2. Sibis was already planning to fill his pockets thanks to this, but the Duchess had other plans. She plans to temporarily transfer her mining rights to a third party. Since there is no suitable mining equipment in Manzalt, it was not a mine with large reserves. So there was no point in keeping it. Rubbing well, Symphony said she was going to make some noise. By making agreements with certain merchants, they will be able to sell their mining rights at a low price and exploit them. And since gold has long been considered a symbol of wealth, nothing awakens human desires as easily as this metal. If the rumor spreads that someone got gold at a low price, people will flock in search of their desires. Manzalt recalled that there is nothing more dangerous than human desires. Instead of completely ceding mining rights, the blonde will set the condition that they use the people of Manzalt as labor. They will leave garbage after mining. Unable to restrain nature, they will decompose immediately. And the mining facilities will also break down, which they will desperately abandon. The girl realized that her husband realized this sooner than she expected. She confirmed that the gold mine was a lucky find, but that she was trying to find something else. It was about iron, which is useful in itself and does not require large expenses. But its production is strictly controlled by national policy. The most common use of iron is the manufacture of weapons. In other words, if a state has enough iron, then this is a guarantee of military power. In fact, it was the power of a strong army that allowed Brock to become emperor. They were called barbarians, but in reality, no force could resist the northern armies. All these actions finally laid the foundation for a brutal war. Manzalt asked if his wife really needed such a powerful army. The man thought seriously about these words and repeated them again. When there is a strong army, there is no need to fight, but there is also no need to be lenient. After all, manufacturing weapons is not the only thing that can be made from iron. Symphony spoke with Martin and found out that it was possible to dismantle the well installation. Moreover, if you add protection against the cold of Manzalt, you can create special mining equipment. The husband remembered that if the enthusiasm for gold fades, the interest in Manzalt will disappear. The Duchess believed that this apathy would be her main opportunity. In other words, she meant that she was going to deliberately pretend that nothing was working in the duchy. But the empire is currently in conflict between the imperial family and the southern faction centered in Orsent. Marigut in the east was annexed to the royal family. Pelission and Orsent in the west acted in their own interests. At the same negotiation table, the only thing they thought about was how to hunt. They also thought about how to feed their dogs, as it was better to use them as needed. When Manzalt is old enough to sit at the same table with them, there will be those who want to hold him back. The Duke suggested it would be better to control this on their side and dedicate time to maintenance. But if you get angry with them for no reason, all future plans will be destroyed. The symphony recalled that people looked down on Manzalt and that no one would suspect anything of Manzalt if he crashed after the actual takeoff. This is the perfect plan to catch them off guard, because when everyone lets their guard down, Manzalt will start moving again. Here the Duke asked if his wife had thought in advance about what she would have to answer in the future. She replied that you must remember everything you can remember, because this is not child's play. As Bruges watched everything the blonde did, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was putting together a complex puzzle. If he has the perfect plan and wants to implement it, then it's like assembling a puzzle piece by piece. The symphony was surprised by these words and said that this was not the correct definition. The more a girl does, the more the future she saw will differ from what will happen in reality. Therefore, there are invisible restrictions on the plans they make based on the future they imagine. Looking at Brosch's army from the future, she hoped Manzalt would have high-quality iron. But just like with the discovery of gold, there are likely variables they haven't thought of. After thinking for a while, the Duchess said she never considered her plan ideal, but rather tried to make it so. Seeing Brosch bring his hand to his forehead, she asked if he was disappointed. He didn't look good enough to say no, and rather felt he had no choice but to admit it. The symphony did not understand the true meaning of the words, and Manzalt said this about her. A few hours later, the lady was in her office, lying on the desk. That smile contradicted all her grand plans. She tried with all her might to prove to herself that it wasn't like that. And Prren asked what exactly was wrong. The Duchess looked up, saw him, and asked when he arrived. The lady was not happy because Prren did not call, but he did it 3 times. The blonde tried to find out what was wrong with the girl, but she replied that everything was fine. Furthermore, she asked if it was difficult for him to talk about it, and asked him to let her know if Symphony wanted to talk about it. Because that is precisely why Prren was at Duke Manzalta's house. And when asked if she ever wanted to go back, the blonde replied that she wasn't thinking about that now. The next day, Prren returned to the office to discuss the investigation of the Charietta case. He said nothing was found to indicate the Duke was doing anything. And furthermore, among those people who made up the Duke's entourage, a man was found who had secret connections with the imperial family. They said his goal was to make Charietta the Duke's daughter and then Empress. Lowering her level, Symphony asked who was in contact with the imperial family. According to the blonde, it was Count Farah, better known as Python's uncle. Initially, the father was going to marry Symphony to Python, but they never got along. In this case, he would naturally protect the current state of the Tiardrop duchy. Python would become the next duke, as well as her husband, but Charietta returned. And the marriage with Python ended. The Duchess did not understand why it had to be the royal family. This is because if the Duke's daughter becomes Empress and disappears, the position of the Duke's successor will become uncertain. And as a successor, the one with a high rank is given priority. Suddenly, Symphony thought and realized that Charietta also wanted to become Empress. So she turned to Prren and asked him to check everything thoroughly again. The boy was embarrassed and asked if something was bothering the Duchess of Mona Salt. She, remembering her dream, said that the current Lady Tiardrop might be fake. She also added that before dying, she told her that she was also fake. Symphony doesn't know if her words were true or if she said them for fun. Previously, the blonde decided to remain silent because if Charietta turned out to be fake, it would benefit them someday. At that time, Tiardrop strongly opposed Brash's ascension to the throne, constantly citing the lineage of the new emperor. Therefore, Symphony must finish off her father as soon as possible, even if only for Bruges' sake. At night, the girl was sitting eating and thinking about something when her husband approached her. He asked her what she was thinking about, and at that question the blonde got scared and jumped up. The man kindly caught her because she got caught at the bottom of her dress. He also said that it was partly his fault, so there was no need to thank him. And then he asked her why she was worried. Maybe something wasn't going according to plan. According to Symphony's words, everything was fine, but you shouldn't advise her to rest. Because she still doesn't want to listen. The husband fell silent, and then the girl asked him if he really didn't mean that. Worried that it sounded like she was scolding. The Duchess asked to tell Sibis about this, because she felt she was shifting all the burden. Watching Sibis's and Symphony's interactions, Manzalt noticed that she had become very close to him. At the time of this dialogue, he asked his wife to address him by his first name. He observed that everyone said they preferred to be called by their first name. But according to their conversation, it was clear that Brush was not one of them. Furthermore, Manzalt did not understand that his wife was referring to the special term. According to her, he was the most influential person in the duchy, and no one would dare call him by his first name. And then the Duke of Manzalt remembered that his wife had recently talked about marriage equality. The man didn't know how it was with others, but his wife didn't need to justify that he was special. This meant that the Symphony could call him by his first name, of course, if she wished. To be honest, it is quite difficult for her to control her emotions now. Although it was quite stupid to increase intimacy by using first names, the girl tried to suppress the blush on her face. And she asked what would happen if she started calling him by his first name. The blonde immediately noticed that Brush immediately blushed when he heard her first name. A sweet smile appeared on Symphony's face, and the Duke asked what caused it. But he did not receive a clear answer. A girl shouldn't think about that, but it's surprising that he has that side too. Suddenly, Brush felt the need to say that his wife had a much prettier name. He also added that he really likes it in terms of sound. But to the girl, this name means nothing. And when she is called that, it feels like she is in someone else's place. And now the man she had known for a long time called the girl by it. And with him, memories of the relationship she lost came flooding back. She does not want to experience this feeling of loss again, so she promised that she would deal with those feelings. And when Symphony imagines that in the future he will leave her for another woman, she doesn't dare wish them happiness. The next day, she and Sibis, who didn't understand why they had come so far, moved to the village. The blonde tried to discuss this with the sunlight, But the man replied that if it were possible to die from lack of sunlight, then he wouldn't be here today. The girl replied that in order not to die, it is not necessary to look at the sunlight. During this conversation, Jack, who was repairing the roof, noticed the lady. Symphony told him he was standing dangerously, and that if he fell it would be worse for him. Jack replied that even if he died, he would lose nothing, but suddenly his leg twisted. This terribly frightened the lady. She worried about him as if he were her own person. The blonde was flying in free fall, but managed to land safely. Mercy asked if Symphony was okay, and she said she was a little scared. Sibis told him that just because he didn't want it didn't mean it wouldn't happen. The guy said he was in the afterlife when he saw Shusha walking down the street. His partner added that it is always good to compensate for any lack of skill as much as possible. Symphony interrupted the boys' dialogue with a question about how things were going. Jack immediately replied that it was within his power, so there was no problem. Jack's partner also recommended that he leave Sibis and the blonde alone, because the customers are already waiting for the lady inside this rich house. As soon as Symphony crossed the threshold, a small man ran towards her. From his face, she immediately realized that her old friend Misha was hugging her. According to Prren, Misha insisted on the meeting, and he had no choice but to bring him along. Anyway, they hadn't seen each other in a long time, and the lady asked him how he was. He said that, when he was about to leave the forest, he heard that the lady was in big trouble. Next, Symphony asked how he got here and if he was cold. Of course, Misha was cold, because he doesn't like the cold and isn't used to it. But since this is a lady's business and not a stranger's, he was forced to come. Of course, the Duchess appreciated this concern, but her feelings were vague. Misha replied that he was fine, because he wasn't going to die alone. Sibis thought it was appropriate to call Misha a boy and ask who he was, which angered her. The Symphony introduced him as the best apothecary she knows. She also said that he shouldn't react so harshly to the words she directed at him. No matter how much Sibis likes him, he shouldn't say bad words on their first meeting. The man asked again if the lady was sure he was the pharmacist, because he looked like a boy. His words greatly angered Misha, and he replied that he was many times better than him in this matter. Prren immediately told him to calm down, because he promised not to get into trouble. And Symphony sat down to be on the same level as him and asked for the same, just with a different intonation. Because she is worried that others will be fine, but Misha might get hurt. Seeing this behavior, the blonde understood how much Prren had suffered on the way here. She also asked if anything had happened and how the old man was. Misha accepted her word that if this continues, then it would be better to go to bed. The forest was very boring and dull, and the girl was very jealous of Prren. She wanted to go there so much, even more than going out. The Duchess listened to all of Misha's wishes, but still something was wrong, and Sibis still didn't understand for what purpose this long-awaited reunion was held. Symphony explained that Misha is an excellent doctor and will be able to do what a common pharmacist and Current cannot do. She brought Sibis here only to show Misha's skills. Then they approached the pharmacist and asked how everything was going. Misha replied that the earth is much stronger than she thought, and the girl also promised to take care of this and improve the earth many times over. After all, if the ground is that strong, you shouldn't miss the opportunity to test this. And the blonde offered to take him back, because Misha really doesn't like the cold. Sibis came over to ask what they were looking at there, but the girl got very angry because she couldn't see the lady because of him. In the end, it turned out they were testing whether plants could grow in this land. Since Misha understands not only plants, but also the soil, which is of great importance. He is now studying the soil to select the right plants for Manzalt. Because the soil in the duchy is different from others, the first thing to consider is its condition. Of course, you can match the plants to their soil, but you can do it differently. However, there are currently no crops that adapt to Manzalt's conditions. But all this can be found and changed, because no one knows what will happen in the future. Misha can change the plants according to the soil, so you must take advantage of this. Anyone who has ever thought about the future development of Manzalt where hunger has always been present. Knows it. At this moment, they cannot guarantee that it will work, but it doesn't hurt to try. Even if the market develops, you still need to be able to produce goods yourself to some extent. Thanks to this production, many problems associated with food will disappear in the future. Because in Manzalt, it is quite difficult to get food without outside help. If they can find a crop that can survive the cold and grow, it will help them prepare for the future. Of course, all this will only be possible with the help of Treasurer Civis. But then Misha jumped up and declared that she was the only one who could help them. It was already late, almost night. Misha said goodbye to his lover and wished him pleasant dreams. When the girl left, Prren advised Symphony not to focus too much on this. You also have to be careful, because they might have impure intentions. They sat down at the table, and the Duchess asked what would happen this time, and Prren replied that he promised to take the lady to the forest. He is sure it is impossible, but the only problem is that she likes to make the impossible possible. Contrary to Misha's wishes, she cannot go to the forest because the consequences of a stupid choice do not end well. Although this was not feasible, the problem was that it was Misha trying to do it. This is a warrior girl who has great strength, and you never know what kind of trouble you might get into if you take her to the forest. To be honest, Prren didn't want to take her, but Misha is the only person who can help Manzalt. It was recently reported that the project launched by the merchant shipping company, Titania, is gaining popularity in the capital. It is said that there were tourist boats floating in the canals, which made the symphony tense. This is something new, because until now tourist boats only sailed on calm lakes. They launched it through the canal and gave a tour of the capital. The Duchess asked if there was a boatman there who sang well. And the boat is equipped with soft pillows, curtains, and cold drinks so people can relax. This knowledge of the blonde amazed Prren, and he asked how she knew. In the end, it turned out that this was one of the business plans of the symphony that she developed. If she had remained Lady Charietta, she would have taken it seriously, but it is really just a coincidence. It would be an exaggeration to call this a coincidence, because it was the current Charietta who started everything. But according to Symphony, the timing was not right for the business. The girl wrote down all her ideas in a notebook so that her idea could be stolen. Furthermore, this was an idea that the lady didn't even tell Prren about, but simply wrote down in a notebook. It would be strange to expect Charietta, who had just settled into the mansion, to guess this. Unless she has an assistant who has been helping her all this time. And this assistant is more reserved. The one Symphony couldn't even think of, she ordered Prren to supervise Charietta's future projects with the utmost attention. She also wants to investigate the maids who worked for her. Everyone must be investigated, including headmate Velvet, because they seem to be the most suspicious. Perfect. At night, Brosh saw his tired wife and asked if she had any problems. The girl immediately jumped up, and the man said she had a very perplexed face. The Symphony never answered his question, only saying that she finished early today. The blonde also decided to say that she had already discussed the matter with Shushu. The Duke said he already knew about this, while undressing at the same time. Because he was coming from the street. The blonde smelled her husband's soap and asked if he had washed, but he replied that he was training. But she knows that he hadn't had any training before that moment, and that the smell of soap was still strong. Of course, she appreciates his concern, but there was no need to exaggerate his efforts so much. After all, the right to use the marital bedroom bath belongs to both spouses. The Duchess was interested in knowing what the reason for separate baths could be. She said there was no point in pretending otherwise, because she knew he cared about her. The wife didn't mind sharing a bath with him, as they already shared a room, especially since before her arrival it was only his room. She reiterated that she really didn't mind, so there was no need for him to force himself to wash in a different place every day. He interrupted her account with the statement that for now, he would need to live in separate rooms. The Symphony argued this by saying that Misha is afraid to sleep alone in an unfamiliar place. She has quite a strong fear, so the girl thought it would be helpful for her if she was nearby for a while. And since this happened, the Duchess will try to clarify her feelings for Brush. She will definitely take this opportunity to put things in order in her head. Over time, when it comes to the human heart, you stop seeing and hearing it. He added aloud that since it was her first day, they should be more careful. At that moment, the symphony was already preparing to leave because it would benefit them. Suddenly, the Duke said that if she was going to leave, it would be better to get straight to the point. The blonde only asked him if he was angry, to which she received his answer. Bruch got dressed and asked her to let him accompany his wife. The wife replied that everything was fine and that he shouldn't accompany her at all. The Duke replied that he was more disappointed than angry. He explained that the symphony did not notify him in advance about her departure. He also asks if the spouse's decision to separate should not be a matter of mutual consent. In fact, he didn't want to offend anyone, he just thought that he would care a lot. Moreover, as a normal couple, they are on equal footing at these times. Since Bruch uses a private bathroom, Symphony thought it would be more comfortable if he was left alone in the bedroom. The Duke took a step towards his wife and asked what he should do if she didn't sleep. Standing next to her, he asked again if he was awake, if that meant he could do this. The girl said that Brush didn't do that to her, but it didn't matter. Manzalt did not give up and asked if that was not what they had to do anyway. If they were going to do it, Symphony felt they didn't have to do it now because they were not in a condition to raise a child. So her husband whispered in her ear that this could be done, not just to leave an heir. The blonde confirmed this and added that if the partners like each other, then there are no problems. But Brush was upset that his wife refused to share her feelings with him. He asked her again what she was so afraid of and received the answer that she was afraid. After this, the Duke asked again, but only now if Symphony had killed him. The husband explained that she had killed Duke Tiardrop, but she replied that if that were the case, she wouldn't be here. Perhaps she would have believed it before, but Symphony sees the future, and either it will happen or she has stopped blindly following her father. After all, the future she saw was probably the worst possible. Mona Salt was not a prophet and did not know what his wife was destined to go through, but one thing was clear to him. But now, the blonde is not in a condition to be abandoned. The Duke asked what kind of fool would throw away such a diamond, and the girl replied that she knew such a diamond. Symphony also said that her husband was right because she saw a future where she would die. She was betrayed by people she trusted and sentenced to death, and her father pronounced the sentence. The father found the girl wandering in the forest. This was the first person she met. And exactly from the moment he called her by her name, Symphony became Charietta. She does not remember her past before entering Tiardrop Mansion. The little girl had to relearn how to speak, dress, and use a fork. People had no idea that she knew how to read, let alone write. But unfortunately, the father decided to abandon the symphony, Charietta's past. The first words the girl wrote before her name were hers at the beginning of her life. There was always a father. The husband asked if his wife had thought about looking for her real family. She replied that she hadn't really thought about it, because otherwise, why would he leave the child alone in the forest? The girl never saw a good ending in a relationship with another person. The father she followed so faithfully cruelly abandoned her. And in the past, the maid betrayed her by testifying against the blonde. And the nanny, whom the girl considered her mother, mocked her behind her back. Symphony herself is afraid of relationships. She is satisfied with relationships in moderation, but wants to escape something more. She smiles easily, reaches out, and speaks indifferently, but gets scared when someone gets close to her. The Duke asked if his wife had ever thought about this. He didn't know that when he did this, Symphony was trying to run away, but he had no need to mock her. Of course, Mona Salt cares about her, but he also likes teasing. The man started talking about how to be more honest instead of being mean. But he didn't finish this sentence. According to him, the abandoned girl was stupid and he didn't care, but he thought she would get angry if he said so. Symphony did not understand the meaning of his words, and then the husband asked again why he would do this knowing she would run away. She must accept this because then she will keep thinking about Brush. After all, to solve a problem, she doesn't need to think about it, and that's what the Duke needs. As soon as the Duchess entered Misha's room, she saw his face stained with tears, and immediately asked who made the lady cry. Misha immediately decided to do something, for example, inflict maximum pain with mandrake poison. After she made him experience maximum pain from the mandrake poison, she was going to use something. The girl loudly declared that the person who bothered the lady would suffer. Symphony recounted the details and assured that she was not deceiving Misha. She also asked if Misha was sure that everything was fine for him because she doesn't like crowds. The pharmacist replied that he could be with his lover, which was the most important thing for him. It was very kind of her because the blonde did nothing for him. In response to these words from the girl, Misha wanted to tell her something, but something stopped him. Suddenly, he grabbed his hair and curled into a ball, and Symphony didn't understand what was happening. Misha explained that nothing terrible had happened, only that he had some taboos. The old man does not trust him, so he imposed restrictions on Misha to leave the forest. The Duchess picked up the blanket and asked if all this was dangerous. And Misha gave her the answer. According to the girl, the elder would not force her to do anything dangerous. The restriction is simply necessary, because she doesn't know how to remain silent. Furthermore, he still cannot understand the elder's decision, and he is not the only one who doesn't understand it. Having heard only one word, Misha realized that the fragile boy had betrayed him. The Duchess explained that she was simply worried about him and that it wasn't because of Shushu. Misha took the idea of taking her to the forest seriously because the lady had no place in this house. This means that the old man is making a big mistake, but it wasn't his fault. It goes without saying that the elder did nothing because he let Misha go, so Symphony is very grateful to him. After these words, the girl declared that in the name of the forest, she would always be on the lover's side for the rest of her life. It was natural that Misha liked the blonde because she was in a different position. And he didn't need her. But there are actually forest clans that live from several thousand to 10,000 years. And now one of them is right in front of the girl. According to Misha, if she were an ordinary person, he wouldn't care, but the Symphony is different. Everyone treated her this way because she was a contract worker for a fairy. But the contract had been terminated a long time ago. It was an irritating disappointment, and Misha promised to break it as soon as he returned to the forest. Suddenly, his train of thought changed, and he remembered the medicine the Duchess had told him about. The girl pulled the lady out of bed, telling her that she had finalized the prototype they had recently requested. But she didn't know if the girl would like it or not. Symphony noticed that the contents of the bacteria bottles looked different. This is because Misha tried different combinations. It looked quite difficult, but for a pharmacist like Misha, it was easier than steamed turnips. First of all, the red liquid was made from an already prepared tincture, with the addition of fresh herbs. The blue liquid contained dried beneficial herbs, and the green liquid contained concentrates. Misha also found that fresh herbs are more effective than others. But she personally recommended those made with concentrates, because working with fresh herbs is too troublesome. If you want to use the fresh ones, you will have to wash and trim them immediately after picking. So it's better to trim them in advance and mix them later. There should be no problems with efficiency, because the herbs themselves do not fear heat. And about the equipment for the production of concentrates, Misha had already asked the man with dead fish eyes. And he said it was possible. Symphony asked if he was accidentally talking about Sibis, the chief treasurer. The girl didn't remember his name, but he had blue hair, and then the lady asked why Sibis wasn't handsome enough. This question hit Misha, and he asked what beautiful things could be seen in this anchovy. He realized that he was a man for a lady, and could not give the lady to this anchovy. The blonde replied that she under no circumstances looked at Sibis in that way. Then Misha asked if it was time for the lady to find a partner according to human standards. According to Symphony, she already has a man in mind. She already had a partnership in human terms, and the girl asked if it was working out. The Duchess tensed her face slightly and reached out, replying that she was not capable of it. And before telling the details, the blonde made Misha promise not to harm her partner. But not just a promise, but she even asked him to swear by the forest, the dearest to him. The girl sat with her arms crossed and asked if the lady really thought she could kill her partner. But only if she hadn't secretly married her. This heavy silence from the symphony led Misha to an attack of strong anger and indignation. When the girl saw the married couple together, she couldn't contain her anger. Prren quietly asked why Misha was behaving like this today, and Symphony replied that she had found out about her marriage. The blonde said that just in case, she would take care of this little boy. At that moment, Manzalt entered the office, and Symphony introduced him to the new pharmacist. The man had already heard all the information, but still had some questions. Misha was indignant because they immediately started talking privately, but still agreed to answer all questions. The Duke wanted to know which crops the pharmacist was considering if he was going to improve yields. First of all, improvement is not something that can be done just like that. To increase the chances of success, it is necessary to focus on crops that have the greatest potential. There are several varieties, but Misha first looks at apples. He wasn't actually talking about apples, because they grew in the ground, they were potatoes. The girl brought a harvest with her and said that it was grown in the forest, where it is called fruit, or enchanted potato. Rumor had it that the people of Manzalt were starving because they couldn't grow crops. If potatoes are grown, the duchy will suffer fewer losses because they can withstand even a snowstorm. Misha promised that next time he would try to improve wheat, corn, and beets. The last vegetable interested the Duke because he had never heard of it. The girls explained that it is a plant that can be turned into sugar. Symphony added that sugar beet is a high-value crop that grows well in colder climates. Manzalt has plenty of land that is not affected by the climate, so she focused her research on crops suitable for mass harvesting. Moreover, do not forget that they still have a gold mine, a prepared network of merchants, and support from above. This month alone, Manzalt will be crowded with people, while at the same time, they will continue to search for treatment ingredients. There is gold involved in this matter, so as the rumor spreads, all regions and factions will seek to take what they have. But the symphony is not going to feed these perpetually hungry hyenas, because when different regions try to keep each other in check, they eat each other. She said this was just the beginning, and suggested they feed their greed and move on. When Manzalt left, the blonde asked if Misha was okay and received a positive answer. The girl was recounting how the conversation went and suddenly mentioned the smell of iron. According to her, the room she was in smelled of blood and rusty iron. She prefers not to communicate with such people at all, because they are always thirsty for blood. They are also destined to have blood on their hands for the rest of their lives. Moreover, most people end up badly. Prren asked to listen with only one ear, because only a child does not smell of iron. Misha was happy because Symphony did not love this man. While the pharmacist was furious, Prren handed the Duchess a list of people who had shown interest in the gold mine. Reading the list, the blonde said that her original goal was to penetrate deep into Manzalt. But she paid special attention to the perimeter entrance, because it should be the face of the duchy. Suddenly, she saw Charietta's name on the list and said that Lady Tiardrop was different from the one she had seen before. Given her interest in Beta and what she had done so far, this did not change. Then Symphony asked if the Tiardrop family was still looking for her, and received a positive answer. If so, she ordered that part of the Tiardrop gold mine be returned to her, and then ensure that Charietta was involved in this. The assistant asked her if she was going to do something dangerous, but the fall of her level was no longer worth the risk. The girl was no longer Charietta. From that place, she only had foreign emotions, but she no longer paid attention to them. As she gathered her papers, the blonde realized that she didn't even need to rant about her feelings. All because now her heart doesn't break into pieces at the mention of her father's name. Later that night, she was lying in bed with Misha, who had been sleeping deeply for a long time. The Duchess couldn't fall asleep for some unknown reason and decided to go for some tea. She went out into the hallway with a lamp in her hand and realized that the mansion was very quiet at night. During her journey, she hoped not to encounter any ghosts or anything on the way. And immediately after this thought, her husband, the Duke of Manzalt, came to meet her. He guessed that he had scared his wife, and she nervously confirmed it. He also asked why Symphony went out without putting anything on, because it was cool in the hallway. The girl asked him not to take off his clothes, but Brush replied that then there would be no point in training. Then he asked where his wife was going, and received an answer referring to the Oval Office. In the end, it turned out that the couple couldn't sleep, and they both decided to have tea. And then Symphony said that now he could go back to work, and that she would go too. The Duke didn't want to leave, and said he would accompany the girl to the indicated place. The Duchess wanted to refuse, but she still needed to return the coat. This was an excuse to spend time together, as the couple has little time for simple conversations. They have been together for several months now, so they are already used to spending time like this. Bruch doesn't know where he came from, but he hopes that someday the symphony will open up. He leaned towards her and told her what could be very sad. Then he walked away and asked if the Duchess of Manzalt missed him. Having received a positive answer, the man was glad that at least she hadn't forgotten him in his absence. In fact, the symphony didn't forget him, she just wasn't ready yet. Immediately, he asked the girl for a lantern, and she asked him if he had forgotten his lantern. It turned out that Brush hadn't forgotten his lantern, he simply has good eyesight. So he can do without it. Then he asked to be given the lantern, since the Duke didn't need it. The man said that she needed it so she could keep up with her husband. And Mona Salt also considered this as another excuse to waste time. When they reached the office, Symphony thanked her husband and was about to return his coat. He replied that she could return it later because she wasn't going to spend the night in the office. In response to this, the girl smiled sheepishly and said that she could return alone. Of course, she could do it without Brouch. He just wanted to do it personally. The blonde understood this, and since there was nothing else to do, she offered to have tea together. And nervously explained that he himself said he couldn't sleep and didn't seem to have anything to do. They talked for a while, and Mona Salt finally said it was a good idea. While drinking tea, the blonde suddenly realized that her husband looked like a bear drinking tea. And in response to a compliment about how delicious the tea Symphony makes, he replied that this is an integral part of female education. She also didn't understand why Brush was looking around as if he had never been there before. In the end, it turned out that the Duke only said to prepare the room, but didn't pay attention to the interior decoration. Only then did the Duchess realize that she had to tidy up. Otherwise, her office would look like Sibis's office. So she decided to ask him if he was tired of drinking tea and offered to bring him snacks. Manazal said it would be too much trouble, but his wife didn't listen to him. She barely had time to say that Brown had sent them when all sorts of papers started falling on them. During the flight of the papers, one of the cups in which they had previously drunk tea also flew to the floor. The Duke reacted at lightning speed and protected his wife from the papers with his body. He hugged her with both hands and then asked if his wife was okay. When Bruch let go of the blonde, she looked very scared and surprised. After that, the Duke apologized and said to take a break while cleaning up the place. The girl wanted to stop her husband, but he broke the glass, so it would be right for him to take care of it. But this wouldn't have happened if Symphony hadn't tripped over a pile of papers. So she wanted to clean up herself. And Mona Salt wanted to help her pick up the documents, but it would be difficult for her to sort them out correctly. Then, with due respect, Symphony simply asked him to remove the broken cup. While Brush was cleaning, the girl didn't stop and said that everything was thanks to her. Then, the blonde handed her husband a kind of cloth to wipe the wet floor. But he realized that it was her scarf. The Duchess assured that everything was in order and she would do the rest tomorrow, so she offered to sit at the table. She also noticed that the tea was already cold and offered to heat it up. The Duke got up and asked her to let him do it because the teapot was hot. A few minutes later, the tea was ready and poured into the teapot to steep. The girl noticed that her husband hadn't poured tea for himself and asked why he was doing that. The man accepted her invitation because they don't often have the opportunity to communicate like this. The blonde said that if he kept repeating this, she might misunderstand him. But the Duke didn't say this to confuse her. She can wait as long as she wants, but that doesn't mean she has to stand still. He remembered that he had already assigned her a task. Although he knew she would run to her husband, he asked her to just guess why he was doing this. Manzalt asked how his wife felt and if she had managed to solve the problem. Having received an incomprehensible answer, he said he had nowhere to rush and, moreover, he was used to waiting. The next day, Prren entered the office and said it looked like they had been robbed. The blonde promised to examine everything several more times and gather the papers. She also suggested getting rid of unnecessary papers, while Prren was glad that Misha was not there. And Symphony was more concerned about the fact that she wasn't here, because she was probably fighting with Sibis right now. Of course, children are supposed to grow up and fight, but they are both adults. Misha behaves like a child, and Sibis is the complete opposite. Both were worse than children, because one is too quiet and the other always insists on his own way. During this dialogue, the Duchess saw a paper on which the name Chariot was written. Prren noticed that she seemed obsessed with something. It turned out to be a file on Duchess Tiardrop, and the blonde asked if something had gone wrong. Since her husband was in the office yesterday and the papers were folded, the assistant asked if she had been caught. Continuing to pick up papers from the floor, she said she hoped Duke Manzalt had vision problems. The girl turned to him with a serious and slightly angry face and told him that she was not joking about that. The blonde knew it. She was just trying to let him know that it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like Lady Tiardrop was involved in Tiardrop's affairs, nor did she do anything that could harm her. But this whole change business was only a problem for the Symphony, and it was impossible to involve others. And even knowing all this, the Duchess of Manzalt was still worried about something. Prren offered to talk about it immediately if it really bothered her. He thought that with the help of Lady and Manzalt, it would be possible to solve this problem more easily. And this would only be an advantage for them. The lady asked if those were two catchy words, and Prren replied that it was more of an expectation. The blonde is sure that there were many reasons, but the fact that everything was possible only thanks to the Symphony remains a fact. It was a sin not to trust such a person. Then she remembered Misha's words. He spoke of the smell of blood because pure-blooded elves hate killing, and it is impossible not to be sensitive to the smell of blood. Prren was also an elf, but not a pure blood, but a half-breed who does not smell the scent of murder. Carrying another pile, the blonde said that at least he has eyes. According to him, he has lived for a long time and has seen, heard, and felt a lot. Handing this pile to the Symphony, he added that he has a special view of people. The Duchess asked if Brush was such a good man in his eyes. The assistant considered the lady a decent person and did not trust the Duke. But he trusted Symphony's choice. He says this even though he knows what stupid decisions the blonde has made before. The boy never thought that the lady's choice was stupid. He just thinks that she did everything she could. Symphony noticed that both Prren and Misha were too favorable towards her. If you believe the blonde's words, the girl grew up and became a wonderful person. A few hours later, Symphony approached Sibis's office and heard Misha arguing with him. They were shouting at the top of their lungs, and Misha again said that Sibis had dead fish eyes. The treasurer asked them to stop talking about non-work matters in the workplace. After hearing all this, Mercy offered to visit them later. And the blonde said she would go with Prren first. On the way to Pren's office, Mercy pointed to the window through which the Duke could be seen training. The lady said she didn't know that the training ground could be seen from here. Seeing men fighting with real swords, she asked if it was too much, and Mercy replied that there was nothing wrong with it. She called him the best warrior in Manzalt because he was capable of facing a large number of opponents. In fact, it was more like giving advice than real training. The maid also experienced this when she was an apprentice in the mansion herself. The Duke of Manzalt was well loved among the local people because they knew what kind of person he was. After all, it's not that easy to be born into high nobility and work as a mercenary. Of course, Mercy made an exception because Bruges was a mercenary in the past. She said he was a mercenary until he inherited the throne. Symphony realized that, compared to the time she spent in Manzalt. She really knew very little about her husband. She recalled his behavior and words, and knew that he had always understood her and treated her as an equal. The blonde decided that, as a colleague and partner, she should also work harder. When the girl was already with Prren, he reported that they had already signed a contract with Tequiana. She also asked who was above Tequiana and received the answer that Prren was also interested. She installed an agent and asked him to observe what was happening from afar, because she was afraid of seeing an unfamiliar face. But this face turned out, on the contrary, to be familiar. It was Hans, a boy who had previously worked for Symphony. The blonde is sure that they have found a suitable replacement, since they cannot leave their position empty. Unfortunately, Hans is easily carried away by feelings of material pettiness. And even if he becomes one of them, you never know when he will betray you. Such a personality will definitely be useful, depending on the situation. Of course, if he can hold out until it is necessary. It was a decision based on considerations other than the successor's capabilities. If the results are bad, then there is someone to blame. Prren would never have made such a request to the daughter of Duke Tiardrop. The Duchess suggested dividing everyone into groups instead of letting them all in at once. According to her, if everything goes as it is now, they will often change people. Despite everything, Charietta's notes did not change. And if we look at the overall results, this was not enough to satisfy the Duke. She will be very nervous and will soon need a lot of people. Prren took note of this and suggested they talk about Lady Tiardrop. Symphony replied that she tries not to fill her head with that, even when talking about it. She feels like she is stumbling upon long-forgotten problems and is afraid of becoming a burden to brush. She felt deep emotional pain and understood that there was no need to hide these problems. And yet, in order to discuss this problem, she would have to describe the entire history between her and Charietta. In fact, she already has many skeletons in her closet, so there is no need to add more. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound that Prren also heard. This sound was getting closer and closer. Suddenly, Mercy, out of breath, ran into the office and said they had problems. She was very scared and claimed it was an accident, and the lady asked her to calm down. The lady also asked her to tell her slowly and clearly what happened, and it turned out that the local mine had collapsed. Immediately, the blonde realized that things do not remain golden for long. And then she jumped up and said that we needed to quickly find out what happened. Prren warned that her identity would be revealed if she made any mistakes. But the Duchess of Manzalt cannot stand idly by. She must do everything in her power. A few minutes later, she was in Brush's office and asked him to tell her what happened. From his words, it was clear that the miners were under the rubble and that their chances of survival were very low. Assuming the worst outcome of events, a rescue operation must be initiated now, even if it is for the sake of one person. When Symphony asked if her husband was going to the incident site, the Duke of Manzalt replied affirmatively. He ordered his wife to stay because it was necessary to give her the necessary instructions. The girl did not like this, and then added that there was no need to show up when the teardrops were looking for her. She agreed with him and said they had to hurry to save the survivors. They must hurry because lack of air reduces rescue time. Furthermore, if the rescuers act too quickly, another collapse may occur. And if you are unlucky, clearing the rubble may have a negative impact on the miners on the other side. Therefore, Symphony suggested contacting the participant who was mining. She thought this because they would still have more experience in this matter than the Duke. Seeing her husband leave with his subordinates, the blonde only wanted to be useful in this situation. A few minutes later, the girl was already checking other departments involved in the mine's development. After all, even a worker with the right skills can help in a rescue operation. If the operation loses even a little more time, the lives of the trapped miners will be at risk. Suddenly, Symphony had an idea and wondered why it hadn't occurred to her before. Fairies can move freely, unlike humans, and with their help you can check if the miners are alive. She asked Prren if she could ask the fairies to do this, and received a positive answer. Without a moment's thought, the blonde prepared to go with the fairies, and the mistress went with him. Despite the anxiety, going anyway and putting herself in danger makes the girl think that she also wants to be that kind of person. Not someone who just sits back and gives orders, but going and acting in the face of danger. According to the Duchess, the rescue operation will be much faster if the miner's location is known. The blonde wanted to know why this happened, but Prren said it was not an accident at all. As Misha said, the ground of Manzalt is dense and strong, and besides, the fairy said the problem was not in the mines. Therefore, the blonde is inclined to believe that this incident was caused by excessive production. But Prren chose the managers based on their professional skills. Most departments would not be very happy to help them, but they wanted to become saviors by helping Manzalt. They might even think that a couple of dead miners would not be a great loss. And they believed that the inhabitants of Manzalt were no match for them, not realizing that they too could bleed. Immediately after the incident, two strangers were at the scene, who said it was better to bury everything before something came to light. They thought they were stupid because they were following someone else's orders. In any case, they will further destroy the mine if they continue to dig around in it. One of them asked to make sure all evidence was destroyed because he didn't want anyone to find out. Then Prren spoke with Symphony and confirmed that her assumption was correct. The girl said this is what usually happens and asked to locate those people. They need to collect as much evidence as possible before it disappears, because it will help them a lot in the future. And the Duchess herself will go to the site to inform Brush that there are living people there, and also to devise a new rescue plan. A few minutes later, Symphony had already approached the Duke and his subordinates, who were warming themselves by the fire. The husband asked what brought her here, because he thought the girl would return to the castle. She took off her hood and firmly asked for the rescue operation to stop immediately. Jack asked why stop the operation if there were still people there. Manzalt turned to Fessarn and asked him to stop the rescue operation. Jack was a little furious about this decision and really wanted to know the reason for the stop. Brush only ordered to leave right now and added that they would find out the reason later. The blonde immediately understood and stated that he was on his way, but then asked what to do if they didn't listen to him. Symphony said that if words didn't work, they would have to be stopped. Jack noticed that the lady was a little angry today, and she confirmed it. The blonde explained that this incident occurred due to excessive production, and the culprits are now trying to cover their tracks. According to her words, all the main miners knew about the overproduction. It is possible that common workers do not know they are doing something wrong. But if they meet an understanding worker, the reason will be revealed immediately. Duke Manzalt already realized that this was precisely why his wife was angry. A few minutes later, the boys had already given the workers the order to stop the rescue operation. Symphony was going to ask the nearest oil department for help. Of course they will help, but time is essential and the people under the rubble must hold on. Brush said they just need to trust people and perform their duties conscientiously. The phrase about their duties interested the Duchess, and she repeated it. The husband asked if this was why she was here, and the blonde confirmed it. Already at the hospital, they were told that help had been provided to everyone in need, and that only the seriously injured remained to be monitored. The doctor said this was thanks to timely help, because if they had arrived even a little late, the situation would have been much more serious. Pierre said this was due to his ultra-fast reaction, and his neighbor said you should have seen Pierre running in a panic. Judging by the conversations, the Duke realized that the victims were recovering. The boys were talking heatedly among themselves, and the doctor asked them to calm down so the stitches wouldn't break. One of them heard Manzalt calling them stupid and was indignant about it. But before Brush had time to continue the dialogue, another miner drew attention to the angelic voice of a girl approaching them. All the other miners, upon hearing about the girl, immediately rushed to look for her throughout the ward. The Duke recommended that they simply ignore them, but since Symphony arrived, they must introduce themselves. Most likely, the department heads were responsible for the incident. After all, nothing would have happened if she had been more prudent. At the same time, the blonde took off her hood and greeted everyone. One of the boys said she was incredible, but the girl didn't understand these words. All the miners were amazed by Symphony's beauty, and some were indignant that the Duke had not said anything before. Manzalt covered his wife's hand, which caused even more noise and exclamations. One of the miners dared to ask who that charming maiden was. Duke Manzalt looked at him fiercely and declared that this was his wife. The boys didn't believe it, because Brush had never been interested in women before. All these exclamations from the miners did not exactly embarrass the Duke. But it was clear that he felt uncomfortable. Finally, he dared and said that they had nothing more to do at the hospital, and that it was time to leave. The lady stopped him and told him she had something to say before leaving. She apologized for endangering the workers, but they didn't understand why the blonde was apologizing. The boys believed that a beauty like her could never apologize for anything. They asked if she was the one who caused the collapse, to which they received a negative answer. Since Her Majesty had no intention of harming them, there was no need to apologize. Someone suggested that the culprit was the Duke of Manzalt, who secretly married the beautiful one. The man again recommended ignoring the miners, because they don't think about anything when they open their mouths. When they saw the blonde, they obviously went crazy with her beauty and talked nonsense. In the last few minutes, she no longer heard their conversations, because she was lost in her thoughts. She realized that the more people she knew in Manzalt, the more she felt a part of it. It is rumored that besides the main royal family, there are 4 others that form a top quartet. This is a venerable title, held only by members of the Tiardrop family. As soon as she crossed the threshold of this mansion, she swore she would give everything for this family. The boy also swore allegiance to the most important person in the Tiardrop family. It would be a crime to show emotion in the midst of all his sincerity and devotion. Lady Tiardrop's father asked if Felio had managed to find the Charietta of the past. The guy apologized and said they were doing their best, but there were no clues or traces. His father told him not to punish himself so much for that. If after all the efforts there are no results, it means that she has really covered her tracks well. The girl was smart and always lived up to his expectations, never disappointing him. Perhaps that is why Duke Tiardrop still remembers her. All the teardrops had silver locks like melted moonlight, and emerald eyes the color of leaves. But when he first saw the girl in the forest, he recognized her by her familiar eyes. The color of someone who was not from his family. Although the Duke can no longer call her Charietta because he has missed her. The Duke had to do this for the sake of his daughter when she arrived there in terrible condition. And all this was due to the lack of privileges that rightfully belonged to her. So, he could only think about how to quickly return everything she deserved. Given the circumstances, the current Charietta has had a hard time adapting, but she is trying. His 2 daughters are very similar in appearance and age, and they have the same name, so it is difficult not to compare them. When Charietta encounters an obstacle, the Duke will not be able to help, thinking that she will not be able to cope. From the investigation, we only learned that the lands of Mallet were sold almost immediately after the girl left the palace. They remember the buyer, but know nothing about his location. It seems that the land was not considered a profitable area. According to Felio, the blonde left taking only some clothes and documents for the land. The father admitted that if he had known, he would have given her much more than she received. After all, while the current symphony was growing up, she only wore and ate the best. Tiardrop ordered to search no matter what, and he didn't care how much money or people it would take. Even if Charietta does not meet his expectations at the moment, there are always other options. But no matter what they said, she was the legitimate heir. This was done to maintain the purity of the Tiardrop lineage. At that moment, Misha and Samovnia were looking at the flowers in Sibis's office. The lady noticed that she had never imagined what potato flowers would look like. Misha thought the blonde was much more beautiful, so she said it out loud. At some point, Sibis entered the office and announced himself, which angered the girl. She was angry with the man and said that her lady was much more important than some position. Furious, she began to say that thanks to Symphony, this place had the chance to exist. But Sibis did not like Misha calling her my lady, because the blonde was already a married woman. This girl claimed that she is not one of them, and that there is no need to force her to conform to their standards. So the girl suggested that the pharmacist call her by her name, that is, Symphony. She said she wasn't a great lady, so there was no need to be afraid. Misha could not allow it, because she was ashamed to call such an important person by her first name. Although everything was fine, she wanted to be more respectful, but the treasurer, as always, interrupted her. This time the girl was very angry, and Symphony just wanted them to stop fighting. Mentally, she told the flower to ignore them and just grow, filling Manzalt with beauty. Thoughts of a better future touched the lady to the depths of her soul. Suddenly, the Duke of Manzalt appeared in Sibis's office and asked what his wife was doing. His wife told him that the potato flowers had finally bloomed, something he had never seen. They grew in completely new soil, which greatly surprised Brush and Symphony. According to her, hopefully, Manzalt will have its first potatoes this year. Then the girl asked why her husband was staring at her like that. When she received the answer that he liked to see his wife smile, she was stunned. The Duke pronounced the name Symphony, which almost made Misha attack him. He said that it is absolutely normal for a husband to call his wife by her first name. Misha said that not even she has the right to address her like that, as if Manzalt were closer than she was. The blonde asked not to bother the child, but the man was not joking at all, it was a fact. The girl became even angrier about this and called Bruch a bastard, and also said that she needed to run away from here as quickly as possible. The next second, the pharmacist attacked the Duchess with all the strength only she possessed. It was a good thing that the husband managed to stop them a few centimeters from the newly opened flowers. Only after that did Misha realize that she had done something wrong and apologized to her mistress. She suddenly realized that she could inevitably ruin these delicate flowers. The lady hugged Misha close to her to calm this overly emotional child. Already in the bedroom, the Duchess asked if her pharmacist was feeling better, to which she received words of forgiveness. The girl blamed herself for constantly ruining everything, but Symphony did not think so. In fact, Misha should have been more careful at that moment. Holding a glass in her hands, the fairy said that the lady could get hurt. And this is very bad. Even if the blonde had hit herself, nothing so terrible would have happened. But Misha only knew that people are fragile and can break. But in Manzalt, it was not like that. The girl remembered that she had someone who would take care of her, and she also knew what Misha was thinking now. She thought of Richie, why Prren had to hide, and why Misha stopped growing. Now everything is different, but there was a time when the illegal slave trade flourished in the Empire. Elves, who were so rare and beautiful, were especially valued back then. And one of them became a victim. Richie was Misha's friend. They were kidnapped together by an evil slave trader, but their fates were different. After that, her friend died tragically, and Misha saw everything with her own eyes. It was the worst of deaths for elves, known for their greatness and nobility. Misha seemed to freeze after seeing and hearing with her own eyes the death of her friend. The lady explained to her that she was not going to die like that, because her life expectancy was incomparable to that of the elves. But she definitely assured that Misha would never have to go through anything like that with her. According to the young lady, only a Duchess of Manzalt deserves to be happy. Looking at Misha's smile, Symphony now understood how difficult it is to heal the wounds of the heart. For someone like Misha, who guards her wounded soul, it is necessary to be very strong to open up to anyone. Symphony really wants her to find comfort in her words and be able to leave her past behind.
Though,